The chandeliers were blinding, 1,000 strangers were watching, and Evelyn Sterling was about to marry the man who had been slowly killing her for 3 years, one bruise at a time, one threat at a time, one silent scream at a time. She looked perfect. That was the problem. She had always looked perfect, but beneath the veil, beneath the foundation layered carefully over her left cheekbone, something inside her was finally cracking, not from weakness, but from a pressure that had nowhere left to go. Like a fault line, like a dam, like a woman who had been holding her breath for so long she had forgotten what air tasted like. If you've ever felt trapped by someone who was supposed to love you, stay until the end. Like this video, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of the wedding, Evelyn threw up twice. The first time was in the private bathroom off the bridal suite on the 14th floor of the Blackwood Grand Hotel, her knees hitting the cold tile before she even made it to the toilet. She stayed there for a long moment, breathing through her nose, one hand pressed flat against the floor, the other gripping the base of the pedestal sink. The second time came 20 minutes later, after her maid of honor Priya had gone back downstairs to check on the floral arrangements, and Evelyn was alone again with the mirror and the silence and the version of herself she no longer recognized. She rinsed her mouth, blotted her lips, picked up the foundation brush and covered what needed covering. Outside the suite windows, the city moved the way cities always do. Indifferent, enormous, grinding forward without concern for the woman on the 14th floor who was about to make the worst decision of her life in front of 943 guests, 4 photographers, 2 videographers, and a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon in the grand ballroom 3 floors below. Evelyn looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 7 seconds. Then she picked up her bouquet and went downstairs. The gown had cost $42,000. Her mother had cried when she tried it on at the boutique, and it was one of the few times in recent memory that her mother had cried for what seemed like a genuine reason rather than a strategic one. The dress was structured at the bodice, sweeping at the hem, with a train that required 2 assistants to manage on the stairs. It was the kind of dress designed to tell a story before the bride ever opened her mouth. The story it told was, this family has survived. That was the whole point. The Sterling name had been synonymous with old-world financial prestige for 4 generations. Import infrastructure, private equity stakes, a portfolio of commercial real estate spread across 7 states. Evelyn's grandfather had built it. Her father had expanded it. And then, over the course of a decade marked by bad judgment calls, over-leveraged acquisitions, and one catastrophic lawsuit that had bled the family trust for 38 months, her father had dismantled it. Slowly, methodically, the way a careful man dismantles a watch and then cannot remember how the parts fit back together. By the time Evelyn was 26, Sterling Capital existed mostly as a logo on letterhead and a line of credit that 2 different banks were threatening to call in simultaneously. Damien Crowe had appeared at the right moment. That was the thing about Damien. He always appeared at the right moment. He was 41 to her 28, which her mother called distinguished. And Evelyn's gut had always called something else, something she never let herself name out loud. He had resources. He had influence. He had a smile that arrived just before his eyes did, which meant it was always slightly behind schedule, always slightly manufactured, the way a translation of a word is always 1 degree removed from the original meaning. He had also, during the 2nd month of their courtship, put his hand around Evelyn's wrist during a disagreement about dinner reservations and squeezed until she stopped speaking. She had told herself it was stress. She had told herself it was a single incident. She had told herself a great many things over the following 2 years, and she had become exceptionally good at the telling. The deal between their families had been outlined in practical terms that everyone involved understood and no one acknowledged directly. Damien's capital would flow into Sterling's restructured portfolio. The merger would be formalized through the marriage, giving Damien social legitimacy he craved and Evelyn's family the financial lifeline they needed. Her father had not looked her in the eye when he explained it. Her mother had talked about the venue for 45 minutes. Evelyn had signed where she was asked to sign. She was 28 years old, and she had learned very young that love was a luxury and survival was the business of the Sterling family, and those 2 things rarely occupied the same room at the same time. The ballroom was extraordinary. She could say that honestly. The Blackwood Grand had been built in 1924 and renovated twice since, and the ballroom retained enough of its original architecture. The coffered ceilings, the arched windows, the marble floors imported from northern Italy, to make even a hollow ceremony feel significant. The chandeliers alone had been the subject of a magazine spread in the previous year. Crystal, hand-blown, each one 6 feet in diameter, casting light that fractured across the room in patterns that looked expensive and cold. 943 guests rose when she appeared at the entrance. Evelyn walked. She kept her eyes forward and her chin level, and her bouquet at precisely the angle Priya had drilled her on during the rehearsal, and she moved down the aisle the way she had moved through every difficult thing in her life, by focusing on one step at a time and refusing to look at the full distance ahead. Damien was waiting at the altar. He was immaculate. He was always immaculate. Charcoal morning suit, silver tie pin, hair swept back from a face that the culture had agreed to call handsome, and that Evelyn had spent 2 years slowly learning to be afraid of. He watched her approach with an expression she recognized: public possession. The look of a man surveying something that belonged to him. He smiled when she reached him. She smiled back. The officiant began speaking. Evelyn heard approximately every third word. What she was primarily aware of was the sensation in her chest. Not the romantic flutter she had read about and quietly stopped believing in some time around age 22, but something tighter and older and more animal than that. A clenching. A signal. The kind of physical response the body produces when it knows something the mind is still arguing about. She thought about the bruise under her sleeve. 4 days before the wedding, Damien had come to her apartment. They had argued about the seating chart, specifically about Evelyn's decision to seat her cousin Marcus at a table near the front, which Damien had vetoed on the grounds that Marcus had once publicly criticized Damien at a charity event, and Damien did not forget things like that. Evelyn had pushed back, which was something she rarely did anymore, and the argument had escalated the way their arguments sometimes escalated, quickly, quietly, in a way that left no marks that couldn't be covered. The bruise on her forearm was yellowish-green now, healing. She had matched her foundation to it as precisely as she could. The officiant said something about commitment. Evelyn thought, I should leave. She had thought that before. Many times. In the bathroom at 2 in the morning after he'd left, and she was sitting on the floor trying to remember what she'd said that started it. In the car on the way to his events, watching the city scroll past the window, calculating distances and escape routes she never took. In the shower, running through scenarios where would she go, what would she take, who would believe her, and arriving always at the same conclusion. The cost was too high, not just for her, for her family, for the line of credit that was hemorrhaging, for her father, who had aged 15 years in the past 3, and who looked at Damien with the specific gratitude of a man who knows he is in debt and has made his peace with it. She thought about her father's face. She thought about her mother choosing venue details over her daughter's safety. She thought about the way Damien had looked at her this morning when he'd passed her in the corridor outside the suites, his hand briefly gripping her elbow, his voice dropping to something private and pressured as he told her, in the spaces between words that could not be recorded, that today was not a day for complications. The officiant said, if anyone present knows of any reason, and Evelyn's body made a decision before her mind caught up. It started in her hands, a tremor, fine and fast, like the hum of something electrical through a wire too thin for the current. Then her peripheral vision narrowed. Then the floor of the ballroom shifted in a way that floors were not supposed to shift, the Italian marble tilting subtly beneath the soles of her heels, and she heard the string quartet go strange and slow and distorted, and the 943 guests blurred at their edges, and the last coherent thing she saw was Damien's expression changing from public possession to something sharper and more private, something that had no name in polite company. And then the floor came up to meet her. The sound it made, the sound she made, was the sound of something expensive and carefully constructed collapsing without warning in front of everyone who had come to watch it hold together. She heard the gasp before she lost consciousness. She thought, dimly, distantly, like a voice through water. At least it's over. She was wrong about that. It was not over. It was, in fact, only beginning. When she came back to herself, she was not in the ballroom. The first thing she registered was the quality of the silence, different from unconsciousness, which had been absolute but quieter than the ballroom had any right to be. Not the silence of 900 people holding their breath, but the silence of a room with no one in it except her and whoever was standing near the window. She was on a couch. leather, high-backed, the kind of furniture that cost a great deal and made no concessions to comfort. The room around her resolved slowly. She was in an office, executive class, the kind of space that communicated power through restraint rather than ostentation. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city skyline, early afternoon light, which meant she hadn't been unconscious long. A glass of water on the low table in front of her, beside a folded cloth that smelled faintly of something astringent. She sat up too fast. Her skull objected. "Slow down," said a voice. She turned toward the window. He was leaning against the frame, not dramatically, not with performance, just the posture of a man who had been standing in the same place for a while and had made his peace with it. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, though he wore it in a way that was hard to pin down. Dark jacket, no tie. The kind of face that would not be called handsome in any obvious way, but that you'd find yourself looking at twice without knowing why. Something in the arrangement of the features that suggested they had been worn into their current configuration by a great deal of experience, most of it unpleasant. His eyes were level and completely still. "Where am I?" she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "The Blackwoods Executive Suite, 3rd floor above the ballroom." He didn't move from the window. "You were carried up here after you fainted. The hotel manager wanted somewhere private. There's a doctor on his way." "I don't need a doctor. You just collapsed in front of 1,000 people." 943. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "You counted." "I organized the guest list." She pressed 2 fingers to her temple and breathed through the residual vertigo. "Who are you?" "Roman Voss?" The name landed in her memory like a stone into still water, sending out rings she couldn't fully trace. She knew the name. She had heard it in context, business context, the kind of conversation that happened in corners of charity events and board meetings, in which she had only ever been present for as an accessory to Damien's ambitions. Roman Voss. Private equity. But not the traditional kind. Not the kind that Damien operated in, where everyone knew everyone's name and everyone smiled at everyone else, and the knives only came out in private. Voss operated differently. She had heard Damien mention him once, months ago, and the tone had been the tone Damien reserved for things he considered threats. "You know Damien," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know of him," Roman said. There was a distinction in the phrasing that he let sit in the air between them without elaborating. "What are you doing here?" "I was a guest." "You were at the wedding." "I was at the wedding." She looked at him directly for the first time and found that he was already looking at her, not the way most people had been looking at her today, not with the acquisitive attention of guests cataloging a spectacle, not with the performative concern that people produced when they wanted to appear sympathetic without actually being inconvenienced by someone else's crisis. He was looking at her the way you looked at something you were trying to understand. Her sleeve had shifted when she sat up. She pulled it down without thinking. He noticed. She knew immediately that he'd noticed because he didn't react to it. The kind of deliberate non-reaction that is itself a reaction. The silence stretched for 3 or 4 seconds. "You're not afraid of marriage," he said. Evelyn said nothing. "You're afraid of the man waiting for you at the altar." The room contracted around the sentence. She felt it in her chest. Not the clenching from before, but something that cut in a different direction. Something that had the quality of a window being opened in a room that had been sealed shut for a long time. The cold air of it was sharp and unwelcome and undeniable. She said, "You don't know anything about me." "No," he agreed. "I know almost nothing about you." He finally moved from the window, not toward her, but to the chair across from the couch, where he sat with the same unhurried economy of movement he seemed to do everything with. "I know your family's company is 9 weeks from insolvency. I know the marriage was structured around a capital injection from Crow's portfolio companies. I know you've been planning this wedding for 14 months, he paused. "And I know that the bruise on your arm is roughly 4 days old, which means it happened after the rehearsal dinner and before the ceremony, which means wherever you and Damien Crow are supposed to be going on your honeymoon, you are not safe getting on that plane." Evelyn's hands went still in her lap. Every response she had practiced for situations like this, every deflection, every minimization, every version of your misreading the situation, and I appreciate your concern, but dissolved before it reached her mouth. She looked at the floor. "It's not," she started. Don't, he said, not harshly, just with the weariness of someone who had heard the sentence completed many times before. She stopped. The clock on the executive suite wall read 1:47 in the afternoon. In the ballroom, 3 floors below, 943 guests were sitting in their chairs, or milling in the corridor, or clustered around Damien in expressions of collective awkwardness, waiting for the bride to return and the ceremony to resume. Priya was probably losing her mind. Her mother was probably managing her father's blood pressure. Damien was probably smiling at people and saying something composed and charming about nerves, and how Evelyn would be fine in just a moment. And didn't everyone find the chandelier work in this room extraordinary? She thought about getting up. She thought about going back downstairs and resuming the walk she'd been on when her body had staged its unilateral protest. She thought about the plane. "What do you want?" she said. "From this conversation, what is it you actually want?" Roman looked at her steadily. "Nothing. People don't pull strangers into private offices and say things like that because they want nothing. I didn't pull you anywhere. You were carried here unconscious. I stayed because I was the only guest who knew which floor had unlocked executive access, and the hotel manager needed somewhere to put you." He folded his hands. "I'm telling you what I can see because you look like someone who has been told for a very long time that what they can see isn't real. And I think on some level you know exactly what is waiting for you at the bottom of those stairs." Evelyn's throat tightened. She thought about the first time. The restaurant, almost 2 years ago, when she had said something. She could not even remember now what she had said. Something trivial, something about the wine. And Damien had been so still afterward, on the ride home in the car, so completely and terrifyingly still. And she had known even then, had known in the animal part of her that processed information her mind was still too optimistic to accept, that she was in a car with a man who was deciding something. She had told herself it wouldn't happen again. She had made that particular promise to herself 14 times in 26 months, and the promises had lasted between 3 weeks and 4 months each. And the math of it was not complicated. "He controls the capital injection," she said. The words came out flat and factual, like a document being read into a record. "If I leave, if the wedding doesn't happen, my family loses everything. Not just the house, the actual infrastructure. My father's health insurance is tied to the corporate structure. My mother—" She stopped. "There are people whose stability is attached to this." "I know," Roman said, "so don't tell me it's simple." "I never said it was simple." She looked at him then, really looked, the way she'd been avoiding since she sat up, because looking at people directly had become, in the past 2 years, something she did carefully and strategically, rather than naturally. "You said you know his secrets," she said. "You said deals and manipulation and crimes. Did you say that or did I imagine it?" "I said I know of him," Roman said. "What I know specifically is that 3 of Damien Crow's most recent acquisitions were financed through a network of shell entities that have significant exposure to a federal investigation that became non-public roughly 6 months ago. The investigation is not non-public because it doesn't exist. It's non-public because the people running it prefer it that way until they're ready to move." The room was very quiet. Evelyn said, "How do you know this?" "Because 2 of the companies in that shell network were mine before he acquired them through a process that I would describe as coercive, and that the investigating attorneys would describe as fraudulent." She absorbed that, set it down carefully in her mind, and looked at it from several angles. "You came to his wedding," she said slowly, "to watch." "I came to see the shape of his current operation," Roman said. "The marriage would have given him access to Sterling's residual real estate holdings, which still have significant value even in their current state. That portfolio would have been folded into the same network within 18 months. I'm telling you this because you are about to become legally bound to the infrastructure of a man who is going to be arrested." "When?" "I don't know exactly, but the window he believes he has is shorter than he thinks it is." Evelyn stood up. She wasn't entirely sure why she stood up. Some combination of the vertigo, the need to move, the requirement of doing something with the information now living in her chest like a live wire. She walked to the window, the same window Roman had been standing at when she regained consciousness, and looked out at the city. It was an ordinary afternoon. Traffic below. A delivery truck double-parked on the street 3 floors down. pigeons on the ledge of the building across the narrow service alley. The city going about its business without awareness of or interest in the woman on the 14th floor who was standing at a crossroads shaped like the rest of her life. The bruise under her sleeve pulsed with a low and steady ache. She thought about the 14 promises she had made to herself. She thought about promise number 15. "If I walk out of this wedding," she said, not turning from the window, "my father's company doesn't survive the week." "Probably not in its current form," Roman said, "but I'd like you to consider whether the current form is worth surviving." She turned. "That's easy to say when it's not your father." "It is," he said simply. "My father lost his company when I was 19. I watched it happen over 2 years. He didn't survive it well." He held her gaze. "But he survived it, and so did I. And neither of us had to become someone's property to make it through." The word property landed somewhere specific and precise and undefendable. She looked at the clock. 1:53. In the ballroom below, 943 guests were waiting. Damien was waiting. Her whole life, the version of her life that had been plotted and arranged and mortgaged and sold, was waiting. Evelyn pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window. She could feel the city through it, the faint hum of all that indifferent motion. She thought, "I am 28 years old." She thought, "I am running out of time to become someone else." She turned from the window and walked to the small mirrored panel beside the suite's door. She looked at herself the way she'd looked at herself upstairs, in the bridal suite before the ceremony began. The same face, the same foundation over the same careful damage, the same practiced arrangement of features designed to communicate composure and conceal cost. Then she did something she had not done in front of anyone in a very long time. She pulled up her sleeve, not all the way, just to the forearm, just enough. The bruise was yellowish-green with a deeper purple at the center, oblong, the shape of something that had been gripped hard and not let go. She looked at it in the mirror. She let herself look at it. Then she put her sleeve down, smoothed the fabric, and picked up her bouquet from the side table where someone had set it while she was unconscious. "There's a microphone in the ballroom," she said, "at the altar." Roman stood. "Yes. Is it still live?" "It was when I left." She exhaled through her nose, one breath, slow and deliberate. "My family is going to be furious," she said. "Yes." "Damien is going to—" She stopped, didn't finish the sentence because the sentence didn't need finishing. They both knew what Damien was going to do. "Yes," Roman said again, and then, "But he won't do it today. Not in front of that many people. Today you have the room." It was not a comfort exactly. It was a tactical assessment, and somehow that made it easier to receive than comfort would have been. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. She looked at the door. She thought about the string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon in the ballroom, and the 943 guests in their seats, and the officiant with his ceremony book, and Damien in his charcoal mourning suit standing at the altar, watching the door for her return with an expression arranged to project patience and concealing something that had no patient quality at all. She thought about 14 promises. She thought about the 15th. "You'll stay?" she said, and hated immediately how the question sounded. Needy, raw, the voice of someone who had not had reliable company in a long time. She looked at him directly. "Not for me. Just in the building, in case." Roman looked at her for a moment. "I'll be in the corridor," he said. She nodded once. She gripped the bouquet at her side, and she opened the door. The corridor outside was quiet, carpeted, chandeliered, the luxury hotel's standard performance of discretion. 2 of the hotel's event staff were stationed at the far end, speaking in murmurs. One of them saw her and straightened. She walked past them without stopping, her heels silent against the carpet, the gown trailing behind her with a sound like something being dragged through water. She did not look back at the door of the executive suite. She did not look down at the bruise under her sleeve. She descended the stairs and re-entered the ballroom. The gasp was different this time, not the shocked gasp of before when she'd hit the floor, but the held breath release of a room that had been waiting. 943 people turning as one. The instinctive choreography of a crowd responding to an entrance it had collectively been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Priya was at the edge of the aisle. Her face cycled through relief, confusion, and something harder and more knowing in the space of about 1 second. She reached for Evelyn's arm. Evelyn moved past her. Damien's expression from the altar, the public possession, the performed patience, shifted almost imperceptibly when she appeared. The shift was not visible to the room. It was visible only to her, because she had spent 2 years learning to read the micro-movements of his face, the way people who live in earthquake zones learn to read the quality of the silence before the shaking starts. He thought she was coming back to finish the ceremony. She walked down the aisle. She walked all the way to the altar. She stopped 2 feet in front of him, close enough to see the exact moment he realized. She watched his jaw tighten. She watched the smile recalibrate. Then she turned to the officiant and said, in a voice that was quieter than she intended, but that the microphone caught, "I need to say something." The officiant blinked, stepped back, gestured, uncertain, toward the open floor. Evelyn turned to the room, 943 faces. Her mother's expression in the front row, frozen, white, the specific terror of a woman watching a script deviate from its planned ending. Her father's face beside her, older, smaller than he used to be, with the look of a man trying to understand what was happening while simultaneously understanding that he had contributed to the conditions that made it happen. Damien behind her, perfectly still, a stillness she knew the exact temperature of. She looked at the room, she breathed, and she opened her mouth. The words that came were not planned. She had not stood in the executive suite above the ballroom and drafted remarks. There was no polished statement, no organized sequence of revelations. What came instead was simpler and more devastating and entirely unrehearsed. The truth, in the stripped, imperfect, fractured shape that truth always takes when it has been kept underground too long and finally breaks the surface. She did not say his name. She did not need to. She said, "I cannot do this." She said, "I have been afraid for a very long time." She said, "I'm sorry, and I'm done being sorry." Damien made one move. A single step forward, his hand reaching for her elbow with the controlled precision of a man accustomed to redirecting narratives, and she stepped back and away, and the microphone caught the sound of her heels on the marble, and the room heard it. 943 people heard it, and the sound of that single step backward was, in some ways, the loudest thing she had ever done in her entire life. The ballroom erupted, not the polite stir of a ceremony disrupted by a minor complication, an eruption. Voices, movement, the electric chaos of a crowd that had come expecting theater and had received something realer and stranger than theater, something that pressed on discomfort centers they had not anticipated pressing on when they'd RSVP'd. Evelyn stood in the center of it. Damien was speaking. She could see his mouth moving, see the controlled performance of public reasonableness overlaid on something that was not reasonable at all, something that was white and hot, and promised a great deal about what happened next. He was already recovering, already working the room from where he stood, already managing the narrative, already 3 steps ahead in a game she had never wanted to play. He caught her eye across the noise of the room, and in the private language that 2 years of proximity had built between them, a language of glances and silences and small adjustments and the 1,000 ways that power expresses itself below the threshold of what other people can witness, he said to her very clearly, "You will pay for this." She held his gaze. Her hands were steady now, which surprised her. The tremor from before, the one that had preceded the floor coming up at her, was gone. In its place was something else. Not calm exactly. Something more visceral than calm. Something that tasted like iron in the back of her throat and felt like the first day of cold weather after a long and suffocating summer. She held his gaze. She did not look away. And then she turned her back on him for the first time in 2 years and walked out of the ballroom. The corridor outside was exactly as she had left it, quiet, carpeted, discreet. Priya was behind her within seconds, her heels clicking against the marble of the foyer, her voice low and urgent and full of 100 questions Evelyn didn't have the capacity to answer. What she had the capacity to do was keep walking. Roman was in the corridor at the far end, exactly as he had said he would be. He didn't move toward her when she appeared. He didn't say anything. He simply stood there in the way that a landmark stands, fixed, locatable, unmoved by the weather. Evelyn walked past him. She said without stopping, "It's done." She heard him fall into step behind her at a distance. In the ballroom, she could still hear the noise of it, the crowd, the chaos. Damien's voice rising above it in the controlled register of a man reestablishing authority over a situation that had briefly escaped him. She walked toward the hotel's side exit. She walked through the door and into the afternoon. The city outside was exactly as indifferent as it had always been. Traffic, delivery trucks, pigeons, the ordinary machinery of a day that did not know or care that something irreversible had just happened on its margins. She stood on the sidewalk in $42,000 of wedding dress, and the September afternoon hit her face, the specific light of late summer giving way, cooler than she expected, carrying with it the first breath of something she had not felt in so long that it took her a full 10 seconds to identify it. Not safety. Not yet. But possibility. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a message from a number she did not recognize. 3 words. It's not over. Her breath went cold. Because she knew the handwriting. Not handwriting. It was a text. But she knew the rhythm of it, the cadence, the specific shape that Damien's control took when it was running beneath the surface instead of above it. She looked up from the screen. She looked at the revolving door of the hotel behind her, the corridor still visible through the glass, the noise of the ballroom a distant percussion. Her hands, which had been steady for the past 20 minutes, began, very slightly, to shake. She had just walked away from the altar in front of 1,000 people. She had just called off a wedding that was supposed to save her family. She had just looked Damien Crowe in the eyes and turned her back on him. And somewhere between the ballroom and the sidewalk, she had made herself believe, for approximately 11 minutes, that the hard part was over. The phone buzzed again. I will ruin everything you love. She stared at the screen. Somewhere behind her, she heard the revolving door. She did not know if it was Roman. She did not know if it was Damien. She turned. It was Roman. He came through the revolving door with the same unhurried economy he did everything with, and when he saw her face, when he saw the phone in her hand and the specific quality of stillness that had replaced her forward momentum, he stopped 2 feet away and waited. He's already texting you, Roman said. It wasn't a question. She turned the screen toward him without a word. He read it. His jaw tightened by perhaps 2 millimeters. That was all. Don't respond, he said. I wasn't going to. Good. She looked back at the revolving door. Through the glass, she could see the lobby. The marble floors, the event staff clustered near the ballroom entrance, the faint suggestion of ongoing chaos beyond. She could not see Damien. That was somehow worse than seeing him. He'll come out, she said. Not immediately. He's managing the room right now. That's his priority. Containing the story before it leaves the building. Roman glanced at the street. You have maybe 12 minutes before he finishes doing that and shifts his attention. 12 minutes to do what? Get somewhere he doesn't know to look. She looked down at herself. $42,000 of structured silk and Italian lace and a train that was currently absorbing the residue of a New York City sidewalk. I'm not exactly inconspicuous, she said. No. He shrugged out of his jacket and held it toward her without ceremony. Not as a gesture, just as a practical solution to a practical problem. It won't help much, but it'll help some. She took it. It was warm from him and smelled like something neutral and clean, and she did not let herself think too long about the strangeness of standing on a midtown sidewalk wearing a stranger's jacket over her wedding gown while her phone continued to vibrate in her hand with messages she was not reading. She silenced it. Where am I going? She said. Where do you want to go? I don't... She stopped. The question had an absurd quality to it. Where did she want to go? She had not asked herself that question. Not that version of it, not the unqualified version unconstrained by what was expected or required or owed, in so long that the answer wasn't there. There was just the gap where the answer should have been, open and slightly vertiginous, like a room she had never been allowed to enter. My apartment, she said finally. I need my passport, my cards. There are things... He'll have someone there within the hour. She looked at him. I'm not speculating, he said. That's how he operates. I've watched him do it before. He's done this before. Roman was quiet for exactly 1 beat. He's controlled people before. The methods are consistent. The afternoon felt suddenly very thin around her. The light too bright. the street noise too close, the city's indifference no longer the neutral backdrop. It had seemed from the hotel window, but something actively hostile, a landscape in which she had no map and no cover, and was wearing, she could not stop being aware, a wedding dress. "I have a friend," she said. "Priya. She has—" Her phone buzzed. Priya's name on the screen. She answered it. "Where are you?" Priya's voice was the voice of someone who had been holding herself together by force of will for the past 30 minutes, and was now operating on the structural edge of that. "Evelyn, where are you right now? I need you to tell me exactly—" "I'm outside, the side exit on 47th. Don't move." A pause, the sound of movement, heels on marble. "I'm coming." "Priya, don't move." The line went quiet but didn't drop. Evelyn looked at Roman. "My maid of honor," she said. "I heard. She exhaled. "She's known about Damien for 4 months. She found a bruise in June. I made her promise not to say anything." Roman said nothing, but the silence had weight to it. Not judgment exactly, but the specific gravity of someone who understood what it cost a person to ask a friend to carry a secret like that. "She's going to be furious," Evelyn said. "She's going to be relieved," Roman said. "The fury comes second." The revolving door pushed open. Priya came through it like weather. 5 feet 4 inches of controlled panic in a champagne bridesmaid dress, her dark hair escaping its updo, her eyes finding Evelyn immediately with the unerring accuracy of someone who had been watching over another person for a very long time. She crossed the sidewalk in 4 strides and grabbed Evelyn's arm. Not the bruised one, by instinct or by memory, and that accuracy broke something open briefly in Evelyn's chest, and held on. "Okay," Priya said. Her voice was doing something complicated. "Okay. You're okay. I'm okay. You don't look okay." "I know." Priya pulled back just far enough to look at her fully, cataloging. The jacket, the phone, the sidewalk grime on the hem of the train, the particular expression on Evelyn's face that Priya had spent 4 months learning to read with the grim fluency of someone who had been denied the ability to act on what they knew. Then Priya looked at Roman. The look was not warm. "Who is this?" she said. "Roman Voss," Evelyn said. I know who Roman Voss is." Priya did not break eye contact with him. "I want to know what he's doing standing next to my best friend on a sidewalk 20 minutes after she called off her wedding." "He helped me," Evelyn said. "Helped you how?" "He told me the truth." Priya looked at her then, away from Roman, back to Evelyn, and the look lasted long enough to communicate about 47 things that would have taken a much longer conversation to say out loud. Then she looked back at Roman. "What do you want from her?" Priya said. "Nothing," Roman said. "Try again." "I'm not interested in Evelyn's family's holdings, if that's the concern. I'm interested in Damien Crow's legal exposure, which is substantial, and which she may be in a position to assist with when she's ready and not a moment before." He held Priya's gaze without effort. "Right now I'm interested in getting her off this sidewalk before his people start looking." "His people?" Priya's voice was flat. "He'll send someone to her apartment," Roman said, "probably within the hour." Priya processed this with the rapid, unsentimental efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this particular crisis to arrive and had already run the preliminary scenarios in her head. "My car is in the garage on 46th, she said. "I'll take her to my place." "Does he know your address?" Priya hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer. "He came to my birthday dinner in March," she said. "He knows the building." Roman nodded once. "Then not your place." "I'm not going to just hand her off to a stranger based on—" "Priya." Evelyn's voice came out quieter than she intended. "It's okay. It is not— I know what I'm doing." She didn't entirely, but she needed Priya to believe that she did. Because if Priya collapsed into the full extent of her fear right now, Evelyn would collapse with her, and there was no time for that. "I need you to go back in there." Priya stared at her. "Absolutely not. Someone needs to be watching what he does in that room, what he tells people, what story he starts building." Evelyn held her eyes. "You're the only person I trust to do that and report it back accurately." It was strategic. It was true. It was also, and Evelyn was aware of this, a way of giving Priya a function so that Priya's own formidable personality would have something to direct itself at rather than imploding here on the sidewalk. Priya knew this. She knew it because she knew Evelyn, and she made a face that communicated precisely that. "I hate you a little right now," Priya said. "I know. I want to be very clear that I have opinions about this man specifically. I know. And about the general situation and your judgment in the last 24 hours. I know, Priya." Priya grabbed her, fast and fierce, both arms. The kind of hug that had nothing performative about it, just the grip of someone communicating through physical contact what they did not have time or space to say out loud. Evelyn felt her own hands come up and grip back, the bouquet crushed somewhere between them, and for exactly 4 seconds she let herself feel the full weight of what the last 2 hours had been. Then Priya let go. She straightened her bridesmaid dress with a sharp, businesslike motion. She looked at Roman one more time with an expression that contained a warning as specific and credible as a written document. Then she went back through the revolving door. Roman watched her go. Then he looked at Evelyn. "She's good," he said. There was something in it that was almost respect. "She's the best person I know," Evelyn said. "Don't make me regret trusting you by doing something that requires her to hurt you." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. "Fair." A black car turned the corner onto 47th. Roman's hand moved, not toward her, just a small directional gesture, and the car slowed. "Yours?" she said. "Yes." She looked at it. She looked at the hotel door. She thought about 12 minutes, and his people, and the text message still sitting unread on her silenced phone, and the bruise under the sleeve of a stranger's jacket. She got in the car. The driver did not speak. The partition was up. Roman got in on the other side, and the car moved into traffic with the indifferent efficiency of a city that had no investment in the personal crises of the people it carried from place to place. Evelyn sat back against the seat. The adrenaline was starting to metabolize. She could feel it, the specific physiological aftermath of sustained extreme stress, the way it moved through the body when the immediate crisis passed and left behind the full weight of what the body had been carrying. Her hands were heavy, her eyes felt gritty. The structured bodice of the gown, which had been fitted to within a centimeter of her measurements, was suddenly oppressively tight. She reached behind her, found the top fastening of the dress, and undid it. Roman looked out the window. She undid 4 more and exhaled fully for what felt like the first time since she'd gotten dressed that morning. "Where are we going?" she said. "I have a property in Tribeca. It's off-title. Not under my name, not connected to anything Crow has access to." He kept his eyes on the city moving past the window. "You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow we figure out the next steps." "The next steps," she repeated. The phrase had an abstracted quality to it, like a project plan for a project she had not agreed to undertake. "You called off the wedding. That's the beginning of something, not the end of it." He turned from the window and looked at her with the same level, undecorated attention he'd had in the executive suite. The look that did not perform concern, but also did not look away from it. "Damien is going to move. His financial exposure means he needed this marriage. Without it, he's going to look for alternative pressure points. My family. Primarily your father. The capital injection was contingent on the marriage. Without the marriage, that capital is recalled within 30 days per the terms of the agreement." She already knew this. She had read the agreement. She had read every page of it at 2 in the morning 3 months ago when she had first started understanding that knowing what you were walking into was not the same as having the power to stop walking. "My father is going to lose everything," she said. "He's going to lose the company," Roman said, "which is not the same as losing everything, even if it feels that way." "Easy to say." "Yes," he said again. He had a way of agreeing with difficult things without softening them that she was beginning to identify as one of his particular qualities. But the alternative was losing you, and the company was going to end up in Crow's network regardless. Once the capital was in, he would have had sufficient leverage to restructure it within 2 years. Your family would have had the name and the illusion of participation and almost none of the actual control. She absorbed this, filed it, put it down and moved on, because there was too much of it to process in a moving car and the remains of a wedding dress, and processing too much of it at once felt like the kind of thing that could stop her breathing. "Tell me about the investigation," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not reluctant, assessing. 3 years ago, 2 of my portfolio companies were operating in a sector Crow wanted access to, he said. Supply chain infrastructure, specific contracts with municipal governments. He made a play to acquire both, presented himself as a partner, gained access to our internal structures during the due diligence process, and then used that access to engineer a default scenario that forced a distressed sale. His voice was level throughout, with the careful flatness of someone who had processed the anger around something over a long time and arrived at the stage of factual recitation. I knew what he'd done. Proving it through conventional means was going to take years and significant resources. So I cooperated with a federal inquiry that was already building a broader case against his network. The inquiry is active. The timing is not in my control. And you came to his wedding to watch, Evelyn said. I came to assess current exposure. The marriage would have been a significant asset consolidation for his network at a moment when his legal vulnerability is increasing. I wanted to understand the shape of it. She turned and looked at him directly. And then I fell down. And then you fell down, he said. The city moved past the windows. I want to be clear about something, Evelyn said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, which surprised and did not entirely comfort her. I did not walk out of that ceremony because of anything you told me about the investigation. I walked out of it because of what you said about the plane, about not being safe on the plane. She looked at her hands in her lap. The other information, the legal exposure, the shell companies, that makes the decision easier to defend. But that's not what it was. I want you to know that. I know, Roman said. I don't want you to think I walked out of my own wedding for strategic reasons. I know why you walked out, he said, and there was something in the way he said it, undemonstrative, direct, with the quality of someone stating a fact they have already verified rather than offering an opinion, that was more affirming than any version of a more elaborate response would have been. She looked out her window. They drove in silence for several minutes. Her phone screen lit up in her lap. She looked at it without picking it up. Her mother's name, for the fourth time. She turned the phone face down. The Tribeca building was narrow, red brick, early 20th century exterior, maintained with the kind of care that looked original from the street and revealed its renovations only when you got inside. The ground floor entrance opened to a small lobby with no doorman, keypad access, clean sight lines, the specific design of a space intended for someone who did not want to be visible to the street. Roman keyed them in. The apartment on the third floor was larger than the building's exterior suggested. Open floor plan, concrete and warm wood, art on the walls that looked like it had been chosen by someone who actually looked at it, rather than someone who had been advised to invest in it. Large windows, but positioned. She noticed this with the habit of someone who had spent 2 years instinctively cataloging sight lines and exit routes, so that the interior was not visible from street level. She stood in the center of the main room with the demolished train of her gown pooling around her feet and Roman's jacket still over her shoulders, and the full weight of the afternoon pressing down on her like weather. "Bathroom is through there," Roman said. "There are clothes in the second closet. They'll be too large, but they'll do. I'll make coffee." She stood still for another moment. "My mother is going to say I've ruined the family," she said. "Probably. My father is going to look at me the way he looked at me when I was 16 and I crashed his car." "Probably. Damien is going to—" She stopped. "Yes," Roman said before she finished, "but you already knew all of this when you picked up the microphone." She had. She had known every specific consequence when she'd stood at the altar and felt the words rising in her throat, like something that had been held underwater long enough that the pressure of keeping it down had finally exceeded the cost of letting it surface. She just hadn't known how it would feel from the other side. It felt like standing in a room where all the furniture had been removed. The space was the same, the walls were the same, but the accumulated weight of everything that had filled it was gone, and what was left was just the bare architecture of her own life, without the things that had been placed there by other people, without the careful staging and the borrowed furniture of other people's expectations. It felt terrible. It also felt, underneath the terrible, like something she did not have a word for yet. She went to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror for the third time that day. The makeup was largely intact despite everything, which struck her as both admirable and grotesque. The precision of the illusion, holding together through a collapse and a confrontation and a getaway, doing the job it had been engineered to do even after the woman wearing it had decided to stop doing the job she had been engineered to do. She turned on the tap. She washed her face. All of it. The foundation, the concealer, the carefully calibrated coverage over her left cheekbone and her forearm. She looked at herself without it. The bruise on her cheekbone was fainter than the one on her arm, older, further along in the yellow-green spectrum of healing, but still there, still legible, still telling the story she had been spending significant resources to keep illegible. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went to the second closet. She found a gray t-shirt and a pair of dark trousers that pooled around her feet in a way that required rolling the waistband 3 times. She folded the wedding dress with automatic care, a reflex, the trained behavior of someone who had learned to treat expensive things gently regardless of what she thought about them, and set it on the closet shelf. When she came out, Roman was at the kitchen counter, 2 mugs, no performance around it. She sat at the kitchen island and wrapped her hands around the mug he set in front of her and looked at the surface of the coffee. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Tell me the rest of it," she said. "Everything you know about what comes next." He sat across from her. He told her. He told her about the shell companies, the structure of them, the paper chains that connected Damien's visible holdings to entities that existed only as addresses in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. He told her about the 3 witnesses who had already provided statements to the federal inquiry, none of whom were talking publicly yet. He told her about the municipal contracts, the specific corruptions embedded in them, the back-channel payments, the coercive pressure applied to city officials who had found themselves unexpectedly persuaded to award Crow-adjacent companies contracts they had not sought and had not understood the full implications of. He told her all of it with the same level-voiced precision he'd used in the executive suite, the same quality of someone who had been carrying a significant weight for a long time and was, for the first time, setting some of it on a table where someone else could see it. She listened. She asked questions. Good ones. Precise, operational, the questions of someone who had grown up in the periphery of corporate structures and understood more about how they could be manipulated than she had been given credit for. An hour passed. Then her phone, face down on the counter beside her, began to ring with an insistence that penetrated even the careful distance she'd been maintaining from it. She looked at the screen. Her father. She looked at Roman. He said nothing. His expression said, "This is yours." She picked it up. Evelyn. Her father's voice was the voice she'd heard in her worst moments, the voice stripped of his social register, of the carefully maintained baritone authority he used for meetings and functions, stripped all the way down to something older and more frightened and less constructed. "Tell me where you are." "I'm safe," she said. "That's not what I asked." "I know." A silence. She could hear him breathing. She could hear behind him the ambient sound of the hotel. A corridor, she thought, somewhere private, away from the ballroom. "Damien is—" Her father stopped. The way he stopped had a specific quality to it. The stop of a man who has begun several sentences and cannot complete any of them, because completing them would require acknowledging things he has spent a significant amount of time and energy not acknowledging. "I know what Damien is," Evelyn said. Another silence. Evie. The name he had not called her since she was small. It arrived in the middle of the silence and lodged somewhere painful. "We needed this." "I know you did." "The company. There are people depending on Dad." She said it once, quiet and direct. I know all of it. I've known all of it for a long time, and I did this anyway, which means I need you to hear me when I tell you it was not a small decision." A long pause. "He's saying," her father's voice tightened, "he's in there right now telling people, he's making it sound like you had some kind of breakdown, a psychological episode. He's calling it a medical—" "He's lying," Evelyn said. "He's very good at that. You'll need to decide whether you believe him or whether you believe me, and I understand that decision has financial consequences, and I'm telling you that it doesn't change what I'm asking you to believe." Silence. She waited. Her father said nothing for so long that she thought the call had dropped. Then, "Are you hurt?" She looked at her bare forearm on the counter, the bruise undisguised now, yellowish-green against her skin. "I'm okay," she said. It wasn't the same as answering the question. Her father was quiet for another moment, and she had the sense of him, on the other end of the line, in a hotel corridor in Midtown, 63 years old and smaller than he used to be, standing at his own version of an altar, facing his own version of the choice she had just made. "I need to think," he said finally. "I know. I need—" He stopped. "Your mother is—" "I know, Dad. This is going to be very hard." "Yes," she said. "It is." The call ended. She set the phone face up on the counter this time. Roman had not spoken throughout. He had stayed on his side of the kitchen island with his coffee, and his particular quality of stillness that she was beginning to understand was not emotional distance, but something more deliberate. The stillness of someone who understood when their presence was the most useful thing they could offer. "He's going to side with Damien," she said. Not a question. Stating the most likely outcome, the one the financial logic pointed toward. "For now," Roman said. "People often do the expedient thing first. It doesn't always stay that way." She nodded. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the middle distance, and then Roman's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something in his face shifted. Not alarm, but a heightened attention. The specific alertness of someone receiving information they had been waiting for and knew would change the shape of the immediate situation. He answered. "Yes." A pause. He listened. His eyes came to Evelyn's face. "When?" Another pause. "How many?" His jaw tightened by that characteristic 2 millimeters. "Understood." He hung up. "What?" Evelyn said. "That was my attorney," he said. He set the phone down on the counter with the particular care of someone managing their own reaction before it becomes visible. "Damien filed an emergency injunction 40 minutes ago. He's claiming the marriage was verbally contracted and that you are in breach of an agreement with material financial consequences." He paused. "He's also filed a separate motion requesting your location be disclosed on the grounds of a mental health emergency." Evelyn stared at him. "He's moving to have me declared—" "It won't hold," Roman said. "The bar for that motion is significant, and he doesn't have the medical documentation to support it. But the injunction buys him 24 hours of legal noise while he repositions." He looked at her steadily. "There's something else." She waited. "The federal inquiry," he said. "My attorney has been in contact with the investigating team. There's a development that wasn't anticipated at this timeline." He paused, and in that pause, Evelyn heard the weight of something significant being prepared for delivery. "They're moving faster than projected. Within the next 72 hours, they're going to need a voluntary cooperating witness who can speak to the internal structure of the Crow-Sterling agreement, the capital injection terms, the asset transfer timeline, the specific coercions used to secure the arrangement." He held her gaze. That person would need to be someone who had direct access to the agreement documentation, someone who signed it. The kitchen was completely silent. Evelyn looked at him. She thought about the agreement, the 14 pages she had read at 2 in the morning, the clause on page 9 regarding asset transfer upon marriage, the signature at the bottom of page 14, in her own handwriting, in the blue ink of the pen her father had handed her, without quite meeting her eyes. She looked at Roman. "You're asking me to testify," she said. "I'm telling you the inquiry needs a witness," he said carefully. "What you choose to do with that information is entirely your decision." She stood up from the kitchen island. She walked to the large window, positioned, as she had noticed, so the interior was not visible from the street, and looked out at Tribeca in the early evening. The light was lower now, the city taking on the amber quality of the hour before dark, the buildings settling into their own shadows. She thought about the agreement on page 14. She thought about her father's voice. This is going to be very hard. She thought about Damien in the ballroom right now, working the room, building the narrative, being immaculate in the way he was always immaculate, and the specific way he had looked at her across the noise of the crowd before she turned her back. "You will pay for this." She put her hand flat against the glass. She felt the city through it, the hum, the motion, the indifferent machinery. She had spent 2 years waiting for a moment when the cost of leaving would be lower than the cost of staying. That moment had never arrived. It never would have arrived. The cost was not going to lower itself on her behalf. She had left anyway. And now on the other side of leaving was not safety. Not yet. On the other side of leaving was a federal inquiry and an emergency injunction and a father who needed to think, and a man in a Tribeca apartment who was watching her from across a kitchen with the careful attention of someone who had told her the truth twice now and had not yet asked for anything in return. She turned from the window. She looked at Roman. "I'll need a lawyer," she said. "I'll have one here by 9 tomorrow morning." "My own lawyer?" she said. "Not yours." He nodded once. "I can give you 3 names. The choice is yours." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet. "Not the investigation piece," she said. "Not the legal strategy. I understand that. I mean the rest of it. The office, the conversation, staying in the corridor, the car." She held his gaze. "Why?" He looked at her for a long time. "Because I watched someone get carried unconscious out of a ballroom," he said. "And when she came back to herself, the first thing she did was straighten her spine and cover what needed covering and pick up the bouquet." He paused. "And I thought, that's not a woman who needs rescuing. That's a woman who needs one person to tell her the truth and then get out of her way." The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight and texture, and she stood in it and felt it. Not with the alarm that silences with Damien had carried, not with the particular charged quality of a silence before something bad, but with something she had almost no reference for and was afraid to name too quickly. She looked at him. She looked away. She said, "I'll take the room you mentioned." "Second door on the left," he said. She nodded. She walked down the hall. She was almost at the door when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter behind her. She heard it from the hallway. She did not go back for it. She went into the room, which was clean and dark-wooded and had the quality of a space that had not been arranged for visitors but was not inhospitable to them, and she sat on the edge of the bed and she put her face in her hands. Not crying, just being still. Just letting the full weight of the day sit on her for a moment without trying to manage it or move through it or survive it, just letting it be exactly as heavy as it was. Outside the room, she heard Roman's voice, low, brief, the tone of a professional call rather than a personal one. Then silence. Then, faintly, through the window above the bed, the particular sound of the city at dusk. Sirens at a distance, the low groan of traffic, the layered ambiance of millions of people living their lives with no knowledge of or interest in the woman sitting in a Tribeca apartment who had just walked out of the life she had been sold into and straight into the machinery of a federal investigation. She lay back on the bed. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about Roman's face when he'd said, "That's not a woman who needs rescuing." She thought about the agreement, page 14, the signature in blue ink. She thought about Damien's text on the sidewalk, "It's not over." And she thought, with the cold clarity of someone who has finally stopped managing their own fear and started looking at it directly, that he was right. It was not over. In fact, what she had done today had not ended anything at all. It had simply moved the conflict from the territory where he had all the advantages into a territory that was not yet mapped, territory where she was frightened and under-resourced and legally exposed and wearing borrowed clothes in a stranger's apartment, but where, for the first time in 2 years, the next move was hers. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She was still staring at the ceiling 2 hours later when her phone, which Roman had apparently brought down the hall and set on the table beside the bed, while she lay there, lit up with a name she had not expected. Not her mother. Not Priya. Not her father. The name on the screen belonged to someone who should not have had this number, someone who had not been in the ballroom, someone whose appearance in her contacts at this specific moment sent a current of ice through her chest that had nothing to do with the evening air coming through the window. Damien's lawyer. She sat up. She looked at the phone. It buzzed again. Not a call this time. A message. 4 words. "We have your father." She was off the bed before the second buzz stopped vibrating. 4 words on the screen. She read them 3 times in the space of 2 seconds, the way you reread something that your brain refuses to process correctly on the first pass, running the words through again in the hope that the second time will produce a different meaning than the first. "We have your father." She was in the hallway before she knew she was moving. Roman was at the kitchen counter with his phone already in his hand. He must have heard her door, or heard something in the quality of the silence that preceded her coming out of it, and when he saw her face, he set his phone down and gave her his complete attention without asking. She held the screen toward him. He read it. His jaw tightened. More than 2 millimeters this time. "Call Priya," he said immediately. "She was at the hotel. She may still be. Find out if your father left the building and when." Evelyn's hands were already moving. She called Priya. It rang twice. "I was about to call you," Priya said. No preamble. Her voice had the compressed quality of someone reporting from inside an active situation. Your father left the ballroom about 40 minutes ago. Damien's associate, the one named Fletcher, the one who follows him everywhere, Fletcher left 2 minutes after him. I tried to follow, but I lost them in the lobby. Fletcher. Evelyn said the name out loud for Roman's benefit. Roman's eyes sharpened. He clearly recognized it. They're not answering my calls, Priya said. Your father's phone goes straight to voicemail. I don't know if that's... It's not nothing, Evelyn said. It's deliberate. What do you need me to do? Stay at the hotel. Don't leave. If anyone from Damien's people approaches you, you were with me for personal support, and you know nothing about my current location. A pause. And Priya, if my mother is still there, stay close to her. Your mother is currently on her second scotch in the private dining room, telling anyone who will listen that you've had a breakdown, Priya said, with the flat honesty of someone who decided weeks ago that softening things was no longer useful. She's not in danger. She's in denial. I know, Evelyn said. Stay anyway. She ended the call. Roman was already on his own phone. He turned slightly away from her, not excluding her, she realized, but ensuring his call was not picked up by proximity, and spoke in the low, clipped register of someone operating in crisis mode with practiced efficiency. She stood in the kitchen and felt the adrenaline reactivate through her system like a current being switched back on. Her vision sharpened at the edges. Her hands steadied with that counterintuitive calm that extreme stress sometimes produced, the body moving past panic into something harder and more operational. She thought about her father. She thought about his voice on the phone. This is going to be very hard. She thought about his face in the ballroom, smaller than it used to be, with the look of a man trying to understand what was happening. She thought about how, even now, even after everything, the image of him sitting in some room somewhere being used as leverage against her by a man she had spent 2 years trying to survive. The image of that made something inside her go very still and very cold in a way that the bruise on her arm and the threats on her phone never quite had. Because this was her fault. The thought arrived without softening. She had known, on some level, that walking out of that ceremony would not end in a clean break. She had known Damien would reach for pressure points. She had cataloged the pressure points herself, in the quiet of 2 a.m, running the scenarios. Her family, the company, her father's health. She had known, and she had done it anyway. Roman came back from his call. Fletcher is Damien's operational manager, he said. He handles situations that Damien needs to stay visibly removed from. If Fletcher has your father, it's not physically dangerous. Damien is not going to create a criminal liability that visible. It's psychological. Controlled confinement. Pressure. He's using my father to bring me back, Evelyn said. He's using your father to buy time and create leverage before the legal machinery he set in motion this afternoon starts moving. Roman set his phone on the counter. The injunction, the mental health motion, and now this. He's building a surrounding pressure designed to make you feel that every exit is blocked simultaneously. Is it working? She said. He looked at her steadily. Yes, she said, answering her own question. It's working. It's designed to work, he said. Recognizing that it's a design doesn't immediately neutralize it, but it gives you a better angle of approach. My father is somewhere in Midtown right now with a man who works for Damien, she said. Her voice came out precisely controlled, which cost her more than the control was worth. I don't need an angle of approach. I need to know where he is. Roman picked his phone back up. Made another call. This one, shorter. He gave her an address. It was a corporate suite in a building on Park Avenue that Evelyn recognized. One of Damien's satellite offices, a space he maintained for meetings he did not want conducted in his primary location. She had been there once, early in their relationship, before she had learned to read what his different spaces meant and what they were used for. I'm going, she said. That is exactly what he wants you to do. I know, Evelyn. He said her name with a directness that made her stop moving. If you walk into that building, you are walking back into his controlled environment. The legal motions he filed this afternoon create a scenario where, if his people document your presence in that location, he can use it to support the mental health narrative. You appear unstable, and he appears to be managing a crisis. He gets the optics, and he gets your location. She looked at him. I'm aware of that, she said. Then, He has my father. Her voice came out flat and precise, the way it had on the phone with her father. Tell me what the alternative is. Tell me something that gets my father out of that building in the next hour without me going through that door. If you have something, say it. He was quiet. She waited. He didn't have something. She picked up the jacket she had folded over the kitchen stool, his jacket, still because she had nothing else, and put it on. I'll get there faster in your car, she said. He was already reaching for his keys. The drive uptown was 22 minutes in evening traffic, and she spent most of it looking out the window at the city's darkness. The amber hour had passed while she was lying on the bed in the Tribeca apartment staring at the ceiling and not sleeping. And New York at night had a different quality than New York at dusk. Harder, less forgiving, the lit windows of buildings communicating habitation without warmth. Roman drove. He didn't speak. She understood this as a form of respect rather than a form of absence. She thought about what she was going to say. She had no plan. This was unusual for her. She had spent 2 years constructing plans, mapping variables, building and discarding scenarios, and the habit of pre-construction was so deeply embedded that its absence now felt like missing a step in the dark. But there were too many variables she couldn't account for, too many ways the next hour could move that she couldn't predict from the car, and she had learned enough in the last several hours to understand that over-planning for a situation you couldn't fully see was a different kind of trap. She would go in, she would see her father, she would get him out. Whatever came after that, she would handle after that. The building on Park Avenue had the specific architecture of old corporate New York, limestone facade, revolving brass doors, a lobby that communicated institutional authority through its proportions. The security desk was staffed, the elevators were visible from the entrance. Roman stopped the car at the corner. "I'll be here," he said. She looked at him. "Don't come in," she said. "Whatever you hear, don't come in unless I call you." Understood. She got out. She crossed the sidewalk. She went through the brass doors. The security guard at the desk was a man in his 50s, with the specific quality of someone who had been told to expect her. He looked up when she entered and reached immediately for the phone on the desk without asking her name, which told her everything she needed to know about how prepared for her arrival the building was. 42nd floor, he said. He pushed a visitor badge across the desk. She clipped it to the jacket. She took the elevator up. The 42nd floor was corporate in the particular way of spaces that were maintained for specific purposes rather than daily occupation. Clean, impersonal, the air carrying the quality of a room that was used occasionally and kept otherwise empty. The corridor was lit. One door at the end of it was closed, with a line of light visible beneath it. She knocked once and opened it without waiting for a response. Her father was sitting in a chair near the window. He was upright, his jacket still on, his posture maintaining the structural dignity of a man who had decided that allowing his posture to collapse would be the thing he could not recover from. He looked up when she entered, and his face did something complicated that traveled through relief and shame and landed somewhere between the two. Fletcher was in the room. He was standing near the opposite wall with the studied casualness of someone performing relaxation rather than experiencing it. Late 40s, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that communicated threat through density rather than aggression. She had seen him at 6 or 7 events over the past 2 years, always near Damien's peripheral orbit, always watching. He looked at her when she entered. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "Mr. Crow would like to speak with you." "My father's leaving," she said. "Mr. Sterling is here voluntarily." She looked at her father. "Are you here voluntarily?" Her father's jaw worked. "Evelyn, Dad, are you here voluntarily?" A pause. Damien wanted to discuss the capital position before. "So no," she said. "You're not here voluntarily. You're here because Fletcher came to find you 40 minutes after I left the building, and you didn't have the context to understand what that meant." She looked at Fletcher. "My father is leaving. I'm staying for whatever conversation Damien wants to have. Those are my terms." Fletcher looked at her with the assessment of a man whose job required him to evaluate situations rapidly and without sentiment. Mr. Crow's instruction was that Mr. Sterling remain until— "My father has a heart condition," she said. This was true. It had been true for 3 years, and Damien knew it, and had calculated it as a pressure point, and was using it as a pressure point, and she was done pretending she did not see him doing it. If his cardiologist is asked whether prolonged stress constitutes a health risk for him, the answer will be on record. If you keep him in this room, that record becomes relevant to the legal situation that is developing around your employer. I would imagine your employer would prefer that it not. The silence in the room had a specific quality. Fletcher looked at her for 4 seconds. Then he stepped back from the wall and made a small, permissive gesture toward the door. Evelyn crossed to her father. She put a hand on his arm, the specific arm, the one she had guided him by since she was small, when they walked together, and helped him to his feet. He stood. He was steadier than she expected. He looked at her face, at the unmade face, the visible bruise on her cheekbone that the lighting in the room made impossible to miss. And something happened in his expression that was very different from the expression he had worn on the phone an hour ago. He looked at her cheekbone for a long moment. He said nothing. She walked him to the door. "Go to Priya," she said quietly. "She's at the hotel. Go directly there. Stay with her. Don't speak to anyone from Damien's organization until I call you. Do you understand?" "Evelyn, do you understand, Dad?" He looked at her for a moment with the old face. The face before the company started failing, the face of the father who had been larger than circumstances. It lasted about 3 seconds. "I understand," he said. She watched him go. She turned back into the room. Fletcher had not moved. She stood in the center of the space and looked at him. "Where is he?" she said. Fletcher tilted his head toward a second door. Interior, connecting, the kind of architectural detail that corporate suites included for adjacency, and that in this context meant Damien had been in the next room the entire time. She crossed the room. She opened the door. Damien was standing at the window. He was no longer in the morning suit. He had changed. Dark shirt, no jacket, the specific kind of deliberate informality that communicated that the performance of the wedding was over and what remained was something more private and less managed. He looked, in the window's reflected light, exactly like himself, which was to say, composed, handsome, and radiating a quality that she had spent 2 years learning to identify as the specific calm of a man who was not calm at all, but had complete confidence in his own ability to contain and redirect the energy underneath. He turned when she entered. He looked at her face, at the unmade face, the bruise on her cheekbone. He looked at it without changing his expression, and the looking without changing was itself a statement. "Sit down," he said. "No." He studied her. The studying had the quality of an evaluation, not emotional, but operational, determining current state, calculating variables. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine. You look like you've had a very difficult day and made several choices that you're going to find hard to recover from." He moved from the window, not toward her, to the bar cart near the bookcase, where he poured 2 fingers of something amber into a glass with the unhurried precision of a man who had decided on his pace and was not going to be moved from it. "I want you to understand something before we continue." "I'm not here to continue anything," she said. "I came for my father. Your father is fine." "I know he's fine. He's leaving." Damien looked up from the glass. "Is he?" Fletcher let him go. Something crossed Damien's face, a single beat of recalibration, brief and quickly smoothed. He had not expected that. She had been correct that the leverage point would move him, and she filed the confirmation away with the same automatic precision she filed everything. "Information, usable, remember." He set the glass down. "Evelyn," he said. He said her name the specific way he had always said it in private. Not the public version, the one he used at events with the right inflection of affection and ownership calibrated for the room, but the private version, the one that was quieter and more direct, and that she had once, in the early months, found intimate and now recognized as the tone he used when he wanted her to understand that the social performance was suspended and what remained was the actual dynamic. "I'm going to give you the opportunity to walk back from what happened today," he said, "before the injunction creates a legal structure that becomes very difficult to exit, before the mental health documentation creates a narrative that follows you." "The mental health documentation is fabricated," she said. "The mental health documentation is a formal legal filing," he said. "What it is and what it does are 2 different things. You understand that." She did. She understood it precisely. She also understood that she was standing in a room with him for the first time since the ballroom, and that understanding things precisely was going to be the only advantage she had in the next few minutes. "What do you want?" she said. I want you to call your lawyer, Miss, whatever lawyer you've retained in the past few hours, and instruct them that you are withdrawing from any cooperative relationship with federal investigators. I want a joint statement issued through both our publicists stating that the incident today was the result of pre-wedding anxiety and medical stress, and that both parties are taking time to address the situation privately. He looked at her steadily. In exchange, the injunction is withdrawn, the mental health motion is dropped, and the capital injection proceeds on a modified timeline. She looked at him. He looked at him, and she thought about everything Roman had told her. The shell companies, the federal inquiry, the 72-hour window, the witness they needed. She thought about the agreement on page 14 and the signature in blue ink. She thought about the investigating attorneys and their preference for non-public operation until they were ready to move. She thought about all of it, and underneath all of it, underneath the legal architecture and the strategic calculation and the assessment of leverage points, she thought about the bruise on her cheekbone that he had looked at without changing his expression. "No," she said. The single syllable landed in the room without apology or elaboration. Damien was quiet for a moment. "I don't think you understand the position you're in," he said. "I understand it exactly. Your family's company is already gone," she said. "You were going to fold it into your network within 2 years. Roman Voss explained the mechanism clearly. Withdrawing from this doesn't save Sterling Capital. It just means I helped you do it." She watched his face. She watched the specific moment when the mention of Roman's name produced a reaction he did not fully suppress, a tightening around the eyes, brief, controlled, but real. The first genuinely unmanaged expression she had seen from him in 2 years. "Voss," he said. His voice had changed by approximately 1 degree, not louder, colder. "You've been with Voss." "He told me about the federal inquiry," she said. "He told me about the shell companies. He told me about the investigation timeline." She held his gaze. "And I told him about page 9 and page 14 of our agreement." The room was completely silent. Damien looked at her for a long moment. She watched the processing happen behind his face, watched him run the variables, recalculate the positions, reassess what she knew and what she didn't, determine the new shape of the situation. She watched him do all of it with the terrible efficiency of a man who had been doing this his entire life and was very good at it. Then he said, "You don't know what you've just done." His voice was quiet, not the anger volume she had learned to anticipate before bad things happened. Quieter than that. The specific quiet of something that had moved past the stage of needing volume. She kept her face level. She kept her hand still. "I know exactly what I've done," she said. "Voss is using you," Damien said. "Whatever he's told you about the investigation, whatever his version of events is, I need you to understand that he has a specific interest in your cooperation that has nothing to do with your safety or your family's well-being. He lost 2 companies when I acquired them. This is his retrieval mechanism. You are his evidence." "I know," she said. He blinked, just once. "I know I'm useful to the investigation," she said. "I know Roman has interests in this that aren't purely altruistic. I know I'm a cooperating witness who happens to have signed a document that maps your financial network." She took a breath. "I also know that you put a bruise on my face 4 days before our wedding and looked at it just now without changing your expression. And I know that the man you sent to keep my 63-year-old father with a heart condition in a corporate suite tonight did it because you calculated that my love for my father was a vulnerability you could operate against." She paused. "So yes, I know what I've done. I've made myself useful to people who are trying to stop you, and I'm going to keep being useful." Damien was very still. She turned toward the door. "Evelyn," the private voice again. But different now. The control in it was different, tighter, the way something is tighter when it is closer to breaking. "If you leave this room and go back to whatever he's set up for you, I will dismantle every relationship you have. I will make sure your father's medical coverage lapses before the end of the month. I will make sure Priya's consultancy, the one she's been building for 3 years, loses every corporate client it has. I will make sure that every person who came to our wedding today knows a version of this story in which you are the architect of a public breakdown and I am the injured party." His voice did not rise. It dropped. "I have been building this position for a long time. I will burn everything around you before I allow you to be the thing that ends it. She stood with her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn around. She thought about Priya's consultancy. She thought about her father's medical coverage. She thought about 3 years of Damien building his position, laying his groundwork, calculating every vulnerability, and the cold and terrible competence with which he had just enumerated exactly which things he would destroy and in what order. He would do it. She knew he would do it. This was not a bluff. She had the specific literacy around his threats, the 2 years of accumulated knowledge of what he delivered on and what he deployed for effect. And this was not effect. This was statement of intent. She stood at the doorframe. She thought about 14 promises. And the 15th. She thought about standing in front of a mirror with her sleeve pushed up and looking at the bruise for the first time without trying to cover it. She thought about Roman in the corridor of the hotel. Not for me, just in the building, in case. And him saying, "I'll be in the corridor." She turned around. Damien was watching her with the expression of a man who believed he had just reestablished control of a situation that had briefly escaped him. She looked at him. She said, "I know you'll do all of it, and I'm going to testify anyway." His expression didn't change. She left. She walked through the first room, past Fletcher, who watched her go with the flat professional attention of a man performing a function rather than having a response. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood in the corridor waiting for the elevator to arrive, and she felt, in the aftermath of the conversation she'd just had, the specific physical symptom of extreme stress metabolizing in real time. Her hands beginning to shake, very slightly, her breathing arriving in shallower intervals than normal, her vision carrying a faint unreality at the edges as the controlled precision she had maintained in that room started to discharge. The elevator opened. She got in. She rode it down 42 floors in silence. The lobby, the brass doors, the Park Avenue sidewalk. Roman's car was at the corner exactly where he'd said it would be. She got in. He looked at her face. He took in the specific quality of what was visible there, not the tears, because there were no tears, but what was underneath them, which was worse, and he said nothing. He put the car in drive. They were 3 blocks away when her phone lit up. She looked at it, expecting Damien. It was a number she didn't recognize. Not a text. A call. She answered. A man's voice. Professional, measured, the specific cadence of someone accustomed to delivering information in official contexts. "Ms. Sterling, my name is Agent Donovan Carroll. I'm with the federal investigation your associate Mr. Voss has been in contact with regarding Damien Crow's financial network." A brief pause. "I apologize for the hour. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Evelyn looked at Roman. He was watching the road. He could not hear the call. She said, "What kind of situation?" "There's been a development in the last 90 minutes, Carroll said. "One of our cooperating witnesses, a man named Ellis Farrow, a former financial officer in one of Crow's shell entities, was found tonight in his apartment. He is currently in critical condition." She did not speak. "Mr. Farrow was, until this evening, our primary source on the internal transaction structure of the Crow network," Carroll said. "Without his testimony, the case we have built over the past 8 months is significantly weakened. The documentation trail requires a witness who can speak to the operational decisions behind the transactions, not just the transactions themselves." Another pause, deliberate in the way official pauses are deliberate. "Which means the cooperation you offered to Mr. Voss's attorney this afternoon has become considerably more significant than it was when you offered it." She sat very still in the moving car. "Ms. Sterling," Carroll's voice was even, "I need to be direct with you. The timeline has moved. We need your testimony, in formal session, within 48 hours. If we don't move in that window, we lose the legal momentum and Crow's attorneys will have sufficient time to construct a defensive architecture that makes prosecution significantly more difficult." A beat. "I understand this is a significant ask given what you've experienced today." "What happened to Farrow?" she said. "We don't know yet." "Do you think Damien—" "I can't speculate on that," he said. "What I can tell you is that the timing is not coincidental and that the situation has changed materially in the last 2 hours." She looked out the car window at the city moving past. She thought about Damien's voice in the room on the 42nd floor. "I have been building this position for a long time. I will burn everything around you." She thought about Ellis Farrow in an apartment she had never seen, in critical condition, because he had agreed to tell the truth. She thought about 48 hours. She thought about Priya's consultancy and her father's medical coverage and the 943 guests who had watched her walk away from the altar, and all the things that were going to happen to all the people she loved in the service of a man who had looked at the bruise on her face. "Ms. Sterling," Carol's voice on the phone. "I need an answer." She looked at the city moving past the car window, the lights, the indifferent motion of it all. 48 hours, she said. "Yes? I'll be there." She ended the call. Roman was watching the road. He had heard enough from her side of the conversation to understand the shape of it, and he waited with his particular quality of stillness while she sat with the phone in her lap and the weight of the last 10 seconds settling over her like something physical. "Farrow," she said. "Ellis Farrow. Do you know him?" A beat. "Yes." "He's in critical condition." Roman's hands tightened on the wheel, just slightly, just enough. "They need me to testify in 48 hours, she said. "Without his testimony, the case collapses." "I know who Farrow is," Roman said. His voice had dropped by one register. "I introduced him to the inquiry 8 months ago." He exhaled through his nose, a single, controlled breath. "Is he alive?" Carol said critical condition. Nothing more. The car moved through 2 blocks of silence. "This was Damien," she said. Roman said nothing, which was its own answer. She thought about the 42nd floor, about Damien's voice in that room, the specific cold of it when he had stopped performing patients and simply stated in plain language what he intended to do. "I will burn everything around you." She had understood it as a threat directed at her, at the people she loved, the relationships she had. She had not understood it until this moment, as a statement of operational intent already in progress. He hadn't waited for her answer. He had already moved. "Take me back to Tribeca," she said. "Evelyn, I need 4 hours of sleep, and then I need to talk to Carol's team directly. Take me back." He took her back. She slept for 3 hours and 20 minutes, which wasn't 4 but was enough, in the way that enough is defined under extreme conditions. Sufficient to sustain function, not sufficient to feel like rest. She woke at 4 in the morning with the specific clarity that sometimes arrived after insufficient sleep in crisis conditions, a clarity that had nothing restorative about it and everything operational. She lay on her back in the dark and constructed the next 18 hours in her mind. Testimony preparation. Carol's team. Documentation review. She would need to walk through the agreement in detail, every clause, every implication, every connection between the language on the page and the financial movements Roman had described. She would need to be precise. She would need to be credible. She would need to be the kind of witness that opposing counsel could not rattle, which meant she could not be rattled, which meant she had approximately 18 hours to build the interior architecture that would hold under direct examination by attorneys whose entire function was to find the place where it would crack. She thought about Damien. She thought about Ellis Farrow. She got up. Roman was already awake. She found him at the kitchen island with coffee and a laptop and the specific appearance of a man who had not slept and was not going to apologize for it. He looked up when she came in. He took in the expression on her face, and whatever he saw there made him close the laptop. "Carol's team is available at 7, he said. "I've arranged for a car." "My own lawyer," she said. "Is she confirmed?" "She'll meet us there." Evelyn poured coffee. She stood at the counter and drank it without sitting down and looked at the dark window and thought about what the next hour required her to be. "Priya has my father at her firm's conference room," Roman said. "They moved last night after you called. The building has security. Damien's people won't have the access." "My mother?" "Still at the hotel. She's retained her own attorney, apparently. The attorney has been in contact with Damien's legal team." Evelyn absorbed this without expression. "She's aligning with him." "For now," Roman said. Not gently, just accurately. She thought about her mother choosing venue details over her daughter's safety. She thought about all the things she had covered for all the years she had been covering them, and about who had benefited from the covering, and about the specific way her mother had looked at her in the ballroom before she took the microphone, the specific terror of a woman watching a script deviate. And she put all of it down in the place in her mind where she put things that were true and painful and not immediately useful. "Okay," she said. They were at Carol's field office by 7:15. The space was unremarkable in the particular way of federal working environments, functional, deliberately generic, the architecture of an institution that had decided long ago that the work mattered and the space did not. A conference room, a long table, 3 people on Carol's side, Carol himself, mid-50s, gray and precise, a younger woman named Reyes who handled documentation, and a man named Park who did not introduce his specific function and whose questions, over the following 3 hours, made clear that his function was the finding of inconsistencies. Evelyn's lawyer, a woman named Dana Holt, 50, steel-gray hair, the specific manner of someone who had been in rooms like this many times and found them neither intimidating nor comfortable, but simply operational, sat beside her and said very little except when she said a great deal, which was always at exactly the right moment. The session lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Evelyn had walked through every page of the Sterling Crow Agreement in documentary detail. She had described the coercive conditions under which the agreement had been negotiated. She had described the specific conversations, dates, locations, the specific language used, in which Damien had made clear that the capital injection was contingent on her personal compliance with the marriage terms, and that deviation from those terms would result in the immediate recall of preliminary funds already dispersed to stabilize Sterling Capital's most vulnerable liabilities. She had described, in the flat and careful language of official testimony, the bruise on her cheekbone and the bruise on her forearm, and the 14 times she had told herself it would not happen again. Park had asked her once whether she had any documentation of the physical incidents. She had looked at him across the table and said, "Women in these situations rarely have documentation. That's by design." Holt had let that answer stand. By 11 in the morning, Carol had what he needed for the immediate motion. By noon, Holt had filed a counter-motion to Damien's injunction that used the testimony's preliminary record to argue coercive contract formation. By 1 in the afternoon, the mental health motion had been challenged by 3 separate affidavits: Holt's legal assessment, a letter from Evelyn's physician confirming no documented history of psychiatric instability, and a statement from Priya that was, Carol told her afterward, one of the most precise and devastating character witness documents his team had received in 11 years of federal work. Evelyn ate a sandwich in the conference room at 1:30 and felt the machinery of it all moving around her, the legal filings, the investigative momentum, the 48-hour window closing toward its end. And she felt, in the center of it, something that was not calm and not peace, but was perhaps the thing that existed just before those things, the ground state from which they might eventually grow. Her phone buzzed. Priya. "Your father wants to talk to you. He's been asking for 2 hours. I've been stalling, but I think you should call him." She stepped out of the conference room into the corridor. She called him. He answered on the first ring. "Evelyn." His voice was different from the hotel call, different from the corporate suite. Something in it had been removed. Not the fear which was still there, but the layer over the fear, the managed layer, the voice he used when he was still trying to maintain the version of events in which everything was potentially recoverable. "Dad, I saw the bruise," he said. "Last night, on your face." A pause. "I've been trying to—" He stopped. "I need you to know that I didn't—" Another stop. "Dad, I knew he was difficult," her father said. The word difficult arrived in the sentence and sat there with all the weight of a word doing work far beyond its capacity. "I told myself difficult was manageable. I told myself you were strong enough to manage difficult." His voice tightened. "I told myself things that I needed to believe because the alternative—" "Dad," she said it firmly, not harshly. "I know. That is not—" His voice broke briefly and then reassembled. "That is not an explanation. I understand that." "I know it's not," she said, "and we are going to have the full conversation when there's time for it. But right now, I need you to hear something." She looked at the corridor wall. "I am not going to lose this. Do you understand? I'm not going to let him win this. But what I need from you, the only thing I need from you right now, is for you to stay where you are and stay safe. Can you do that?" A long pause. "Yes," her father said. His voice was very quiet. "Okay," she said. She went back into the conference room. She worked through the afternoon. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Reyes came into the conference room with a tablet in her hand and an expression that had shifted from professional neutral to something more focused and specific. "Pharaoh is conscious," she said. "He woke up 2 hours ago. His testimony is being recorded at the hospital now." She set the tablet on the table. "And we have a development." Carol came in behind her. 40 minutes ago," he said, "Damian Crow's primary defense attorney filed a motion to have the federal inquiry terminated on the grounds of procedural misconduct." He sat down. Simultaneously, a story went live on 2 financial news outlets alleging that the inquiry is a politically motivated investigation being driven by a competing financial interest. He looked at Evelyn. Specifically by Roman Voss's interest in recovering his former portfolio companies. She looked at Roman, who was across the table. He had known this was coming. She could see it in his face. Not surprise, but the arrival of something that had been anticipated and was no worse and no better than expected. "He's trying to contaminate the inquiry through the press," Evelyn said. "He's trying to reframe the entire investigation as a commercial rivalry," Carol said. "If that narrative gets sufficient traction in the next 12 hours, it creates a credibility problem for every cooperating witness, including you. Your testimony becomes not a victim's account, but a strategic instrument in a business dispute." She looked at the table. She looked at her hands on the table. She thought about Damian, about his terrible and specific competence, about the way he moved, always 3 steps ahead, always layering contingencies, always building the defensive architecture before the attack arrived. She thought about 2 years of watching him do this in smaller contexts, in social contexts, in the context of their relationship, and how she had understood, in the abstract, that this was the full scale of what she was up against. Understanding it in the abstract and sitting across from it in a federal conference room at 4:17 in the afternoon with the press narrative already moving were not the same experience. "I need to make a statement," she said. Holt looked at her. "Public," Evelyn said. "Not through legal filings. A direct statement. My name, my face, what happened, before the press narrative solidifies." "That exposes you to," Holt began. "I know what it exposes me to," Evelyn said. "But right now the story being told about today is that I had a breakdown, and Roman Voss is conducting a commercial vendetta through a federal inquiry. If that story runs for 12 hours without a counter-narrative, we lose the room. Not legally. Publicly. And in a case where the defense is already arguing fabrication, public credibility is not separate from legal credibility." Holt was quiet for a moment. Carol looked at Reyes. Roman said, "She's right." They looked at him. "She's right," he said again. "You know she's right." Carol exhaled. "If you make a public statement, Crow's attorneys will use everything in it to do what they're already doing," Evelyn said. "There is no version of the next 48 hours in which I am not in this fight completely. The question is whether I'm in it on my terms or his." A silence. Carol looked at her for a long moment. "We can have a media liaison here in 30 minutes, he said. "I don't need a media liaison," she said. "I need a camera and 20 minutes. The statement went live at 6:43 in the evening. She had written it herself, in 30 minutes, in a federal conference room, in a borrowed blazer and the dark trousers she'd rolled at the waist that morning. No makeup. No preparation. The bruise on her cheekbone visible in every frame, doing, in its visible presence, what 20 pages of legal documentation struggled to do in the court of general comprehension. She did not perform distress. She did not perform courage. She sat in front of the camera with her hands folded on the table, and she told the truth in the same stripped, imperfect, fractured shape it had taken in the ballroom. But this time it was not unrehearsed, and it was not driven by the pressure of a body that could no longer hold it down. This time it was deliberate. This time she had chosen every word. She named the coercion. She described the agreement's conditions. She spoke once, carefully, without detail, about the physical incidents, not performing victimhood, not minimizing, simply stating what had occurred and what it had cost, and what she had spent 2 years doing with the cost. She said, "I am not a woman having a breakdown. I am a woman telling the truth." She said, "The man I was supposed to marry today is under federal investigation for financial crimes that I have first-hand knowledge of. I will testify to that knowledge under oath." She said, "I understand what this will cost me. I have already paid costs I did not agree to. This one I am paying by choice." She did not say Roman's name. She did not need to. The statement was 43 seconds long. By 8 in the evening, it had been viewed 900,000 times. By 9:30, Damien's PR team had issued a response that was the specific kind of measured and professionally worded response that communicated to anyone who had any experience reading such things that the person it was defending was in serious trouble. By 10, 4 of Damien's most significant corporate allies had issued statements of their own indicating they were monitoring the situation, which was the language that people used when they were preparing to distance themselves from something and had not yet finalized their exit timing. Evelyn watched all of it from the Tribeca apartment on Roman's laptop, sitting at the kitchen island with cold coffee and the specific exhaustion of a person who has run an extreme distance and arrived somewhere but cannot yet tell if the somewhere is a destination or just a landmark on a longer road. Roman came back from a phone call. "Pharaoh's testimony is complete," he said. "He's going to survive. The recording is with Carol's team." He set his phone down. "The inquiry is moving to the next phase. The press narrative Damien launched this afternoon is losing ground." He looked at her. "You did that." She said nothing. "The statement," he said. That was the thing that turned it. She looked at the laptop screen, at the number climbing on the view counter, at the comment sections she was not reading, the news headlines she was not clicking, the spreading, branching, unstoppable movement of a truth that had finally been given a clear line of sight. "He's going to come," she said. Roman looked at her. "Not legally," she said. "Not through attorneys. That's not—" She shook her head. "He's losing. He can feel it. And when he feels it—" She stopped, looked at her hands. "He doesn't accept it. That's the thing about him that I knew, that I always knew, that I could never make anyone understand without them having to live inside it. He does not accept the loss of something he considers his. He comes." Roman was quiet. "I'm not asking you to protect me," she said quickly. "I'm not. That's not what this is. I know. I know," he said again. And then, "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him across the kitchen island. She thought about the corridor of the Blackwood Grand Hotel, 7 hours after the ceremony that had not happened. "I'll be in the corridor," he had said. And he had been there. She thought about the car on Park Avenue. She thought about the cold glass of the window in the executive suite and the city humming through it and the specific quality of standing next to someone who told you the truth and then got out of your way. She thought about a great many things that she did not have the language for yet, and she filed them in the place where she put things that were true and would need to be looked at later when there was time, when the machinery had stopped grinding for long enough to allow for something quieter. She closed the laptop. She said, "I'm going to sleep." "Good." She walked down the hall. She was almost at the door when the sound came. Not her phone. Not Roman's. Something else. A sound from the building. Exterior, below the window at the end of the corridor. A specific quality of sound that should not have been there at 10:47 at night, in a building that had keypad access and no doorman and was off-title and not connected to anything Damien had access to. She stood in the hallway and listened. Roman was already moving from the kitchen. They looked at each other in the corridor. She heard it again. The particular sound of a door that has been opened by someone who knows how to open doors without making the sounds that doors normally make. Roman's hand went to the table in the corridor. A drawer, something in the drawer, something she had not previously registered the presence of. The specific kind of thing you kept in a specific kind of drawer, in a specific kind of apartment when you were the kind of person who had enemies with resources. He looked at her. He said very quietly, "Second room. Lock it." She did not move. "Evelyn?" "No." Her voice was barely sound. "If he's here, he came for me. If I'm in a locked room, he goes through you to get there." She held his eyes. "I'm not doing that." Roman looked at her for 2 seconds. Then he held out what he had taken from the drawer. Not a weapon. A phone. A second phone, a brick-shaped prepaid device. "Carol's direct number is in there," he said. "If this goes wrong, you call it. You say the building address, and you say now. Nothing else. Just those 2 things." She took it. She gripped it in her left hand. She thought about Damien's voice on the 42nd floor. "I will burn everything around you." She thought about the way he had looked at her across the ballroom, the private language of glances and silences, She thought about 2 years of learning to read the quality of silence before the shaking started. She thought about the woman who had stood at an altar in $42,000 of carefully constructed illusion and decided, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, that the cost of one more day inside the lie was higher than the cost of everything it would take to get out. She thought about what that woman had become in the 14 hours since. The sound in the building came again, closer now, the specific topography of it telling her it was at the stairwell door one floor below, and the stairwell door had not been on the list of keypad-secured entry points that Roman had walked her through when they arrived, which meant it had not needed to be on that list because no one had expected it to be the point of entry, because no one had expected him to be here at all. Roman moved toward the front of the apartment. She moved with him. The lights in the corridor were off. They stood in the kitchen's residual glow, the small under-counter light that she had left on when she went to bed the previous night and had not turned off, and they faced the door and the darkness between them and whatever was on the other side of it. She heard the stairwell door one floor below open and close. She heard footsteps on the stairs. She heard the specific sound of someone reaching the landing. She gripped the phone in her left hand. She thought, "I am not afraid." This was not entirely true. There was fear, the animal version of it, the version that lived below reasoning, that registered threat in the chest before the mind had completed its assessment. But underneath the fear and alongside it was something else, something that had been building over the course of the entire day, through the ballroom and the executive suite and the 42nd floor and Carol's conference room and the 43 seconds in front of a camera, something that had been assembling itself from every decision she had made in the last 14 hours with the specific weight of decisions that cannot be taken back. Not courage exactly, something harder than courage. The footsteps reached their floor. They stopped outside the door. 3 seconds of silence. Then the door opened. The man who came through it was not Damien. It was Fletcher. He came in fast and low with the specific efficiency of someone who had done this before. And he had something in his right hand that caught the under-counter light for one fraction of a second, and Roman moved, without the hesitation that thinking produces, with the pure motor response of someone who had assessed the situation in the time it took Fletcher to cross the threshold. And the next 4 seconds were not sequential. They were simultaneous. They were a compression of motion and sound, and the specific violence of two bodies occupying the same space with opposing objectives. She heard something break. She heard Roman's breath, the sharp exhalation of impact received. She saw Fletcher's arm come around, and she moved, not away, forward. She hit Fletcher from the left, not with force, she didn't have force, but with the specific leverage of a body throwing its full weight against the elbow of an arm that was already extended, and the angle was wrong for him and right for her. And the thing in his hand went to the floor with a sound she would not identify until later. And Fletcher turned toward her with the eyes of a man recalibrating, and Roman hit him from behind with everything he had left. Fletcher went down. He went down hard. He didn't get back up. The apartment was very still. She was breathing. She was aware of breathing. The specific ragged quality of air moving through a chest that had been running on adrenaline for 14 hours and had just sprinted through the last 30 seconds of it. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. Finally, concretely, without ambiguity, shaking. Roman was on one knee beside Fletcher, checking. His shoulder was wrong, the angle of it suggesting the impact had cost him something specific. He looked up at her. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She looked at his shoulder. "Are you?" "I'm fine." He was not entirely fine, but he was standing, and he was looking at her with the same level attention he had always looked at her with, and she understood in this moment that level attention under these specific conditions was its own form of extraordinary. She looked at the floor. She looked at the thing Fletcher had dropped. It was a phone. Damien's phone. She recognized the case, the specific custom case she had seen in his hand 100 times. She looked at it for a moment without understanding why Fletcher had come through a door at 10:47 at night, carrying Damien's phone. Then she understood. It was not a delivery, it was a recording device. He had not come to hurt her. He had come to put Damien's phone somewhere in this apartment, somewhere in the bedroom, somewhere she would not find it, and record whatever happened next. Whatever conversations happened next. Whatever she and Roman said to each other in the aftermath of the investigation's progress. Whatever admissions or discussions or strategic conversations took place in what they believed was a private space, to contaminate the testimony, to manufacture the evidence that would support the fabrication narrative. She looked at the phone on the floor. She looked at Roman. She reached into her left hand and looked at the brick-shaped prepaid device. She called Carol's number. When he answered, she said the building address, and she said now, and she said nothing else. She stood in the kitchen with the under-counter light and the still apartment and Roman beside her with his wrong-angled shoulder, and she looked at the door that Fletcher had come through. Still open, the stairwell darkness beyond it, the cold air of the building moving through it, and she thought about Damien. Not here. Not present. Somewhere in the city, in his apartment, in his office, in whatever space he occupied when he sent other people to do what needed doing. Waiting for Fletcher's call that was not going to come. Waiting for the recording that was not going to be made. Waiting to believe for a few more hours that he still had control of this. She looked at the open door. She thought about what it meant that he had sent Fletcher here. That he knew this address, this off-title property not connected to Roman's name. The space that Roman had told her Damien had no access to. She thought about what it meant that he had found it anyway, and how he had found it, and what that meant about the 48 hours ahead. She looked at Roman. He knows where we are, she said. Roman looked at the open door. Yes, he said. She looked at the prepaid phone in her hand, at the open call to Carol, still running. She looked at the darkness beyond the door. She thought about Damien in the city somewhere, waiting, calculating, already building the next layer. And she felt, for the first time since the ballroom, a clarity that was not about enduring and not about surviving, but about something more specific and more forward-facing than either of those things. She thought about 14 promises and the 15th. She thought about 43 seconds in front of a camera. She thought about the look on Damien's face in the 42nd floor room when she had said, "I know what I've done. I've made myself useful to people who are trying to stop you, and I'm going to keep being useful." She thought about what came next, and she thought, with a cold and absolute certainty that she had not felt in 2 years, that she had perhaps never felt in this precise form, that had the quality of something that had been a long time arriving and was not going to leave now that it had, that she was done being afraid of what came next. She was going to walk straight into it. Carol answered, "We're moving. Come to the building," she said, "and bring everything you have on Damien Crowe." A pause. "Because tonight is the night we end this." She looked at Roman. He looked at her. Outside the open door, down the stairwell, somewhere in the building or on the street below it, something moved in the dark. Carol arrived in 11 minutes. 3 vehicles. 6 people. The specific organized urgency of a federal team that had been waiting for a reason to move and had finally been given one. They came through the building's front entrance with Carol in front and Reyes behind him and 4 others whose functions Evelyn did not ask about because their presence was self-explanatory. Fletcher was conscious by then. He was sitting against the kitchen wall with his wrists zip-tied and the specific expression of a man who had spent his career on the operational side of other people's decisions and was now, for the first time, sitting inside the consequences of one. Carol looked at him, looked at Roman's shoulder, looked at the phone on the floor. Damien's custom-cased phone, still lying where it had landed. He crouched and looked at it without touching it. "Recording device," Evelyn said. "We'll need to verify." "I know." Carol stood. He looked at her with the assessment of a man recalibrating the person in front of him against the person he had spoken to on the phone 3 hours ago. She understood what he was seeing. She had spent the last 14 hours becoming someone slightly different from who she had been at the beginning of them. And the difference was visible in the way that significant interior changes are always eventually visible. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the quality of the eyes and the set of the jaw and the specific way a person occupies the space around them. "Where is he?" she said. "His primary residence," Carol said. "We have people there now." "He knows we're moving." "Yes." "Then he's not there." Carol looked at her. "He doesn't stay in places where he's lost control of the situation," she said. "I know how he moves. When a position is compromised, he doesn't defend it. He abandons it and rebuilds from somewhere else. He has properties that aren't in his name. He has—" She stopped. Thought. "There's a building on the Upper West Side, a brownstone. It's registered to a holding company called Ashford Partners. I saw correspondence about it once, 18 months ago on his desk. He didn't know I saw it. Carol was already on his radio. She watched him relay the address. She gave it from memory, the specific combination of digits and street that she had filed away 18 months ago without knowing why, without knowing that the habit of recording everything and trusting the recording to be useful eventually was the habit that would matter most. She watched him relay it and she thought about 18 months ago, about the desk, about what she had been doing at his desk, waiting for him probably, in the particular careful posture of someone who has learned to be present in another person's space without disturbing it, without touching anything that hadn't been offered, without being there in any way that could be characterized as intrusive. She thought about who she had been 18 months ago. She thought about who she was tonight. Roman came to stand beside her. His shoulder had been assessed by one of Carol's team. Not dislocated, the team member said, but badly strained. He wore the discomfort with the same economy he wore everything, without making a production of it, without asking for accommodation. He stood beside her and they watched Carol work, and neither of them spoke, and the silence between them was not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have too much and have agreed, without discussing it, to let it wait. At 12:40 in the morning, Carol's radio produced a burst of communication that she could not fully parse, but whose tone she could read. Carol turned to her. "We have him," he said. The brownstone on the Upper West Side. Exactly where she had said. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, the room was the same room. The Tribeca apartment with the under-counter light and the federal team and Fletcher against the wall and Roman beside her. And nothing had changed in the 2 seconds except that something she had been bracing against for the entirety of the last 14 hours had shifted its weight by a fraction, and the fraction was enormous. "I want to be there," she said. "Miss Sterling." "I want to see it," she said. Not with aggression, with a specific quiet of someone who has thought about what they need and is stating it plainly. "I don't need to be inside. I just need to see it. I need to see him leave that building in handcuffs with my own eyes. I have been inside this for 2 years, and I need—" She stopped, breathed. "I need the visual. I need it to be real in a way it won't be if I hear about it secondhand." Carol looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Roman. "She comes in my vehicle," Carol said. "She stays in the vehicle." She stayed in the vehicle. The brownstone was a narrow 4-story building on a quiet street, the kind of New York block that existed in a different register from the Midtown Hotel and the Park Avenue corporate suite and the Tribeca apartment. Residential, tree-lined, the building set back from the sidewalk with the quiet authority of old money. Carol's vehicles stopped at the corner. The other units were already in position. She could see them in the street's geography without being able to identify them individually, the specific invisibility of a coordinated operation that had been planned rather than improvised. She sat in the back seat of Carol's vehicle. Roman sat beside her. She looked at the brownstone. The lights were on in the second floor. She could see the warm rectangle of a lit window, the shadow of movement behind it. Someone present, someone awake, someone who had retreated to this space because it was the most protected position still available and was not yet aware that it had been found. She thought about all the times she had sat in cars outside buildings waiting for Damien, waiting in the specific posture of someone who has learned that the waiting space was safer than the arrival, that the threshold between the car and wherever he was constituted a border she could not take back once she crossed it. She had sat in those car seats with the particular frozen quality of delayed dread, and she had always, eventually, gotten out of the car and gone inside. She sat in this car seat. She did not feel frozen. Carol's radio spoke. She watched the front door of the brownstone open. She watched Damien come out. He was not in the charcoal morning suit. He was in dark clothes. The clothing of someone who had changed for the purpose of mobility, of someone who had been planning to leave before the option was removed. He had a bag. He had the specific quality of controlled urgency that she recognized from the moments in their 2 years together when his plans had not unfolded as intended, and he had shifted into the mode of managing the damage. The beautiful composure of it, even now, even in this, the jaw set and the shoulders straight and the face arranged in the register of a man who had not lost yet. Then he saw the vehicles. She watched the composure hold for 2 seconds after it should have broken. That was Damien. Even now, even in this. 2 full seconds of the mask maintaining itself past the point of utility, past the point of audience. The mask so deeply habituated that it held without the performance it had originally required. Then it broke. She saw it break from the car, and she would not describe what it looked like, because some things that you witness, you keep for yourself. Not out of protection for the person you witness them in, but out of the private knowledge that some moments are yours alone to have seen and do not need to be shared to be real. Carol's team moved. Damien did not run. She had not thought he would run. Running was not how he was built. Running was an admission that could not be managed. And even now, even with Carol's people coming from 3 directions, he chose the posture of a man being subjected to an outrage rather than the posture of a man being caught. He stood straight. He let them approach. He said something, she could not hear it through the car's glass, that had the quality of instruction rather than protest. The cuffs went on. She watched. She had imagined this moment, not frequently, not as a sustained fantasy, but in the occasional middle-of-the-night version of the 14 promises, the version that went further than the promise and into the territory of what the promise would lead to, if she ever kept it. She had imagined it as something cathartic, as a release, as the dramatic resolution that the shape of the situation seemed to require. It was not cathartic, it was just true. That was all it was and all it needed to be, a true thing, happening in front of her eyes, the real and physical and documented reality of a man who had spent 2 years telling her what was possible and what was not, what she could do and what she couldn't, what she was worth and what she owed. That man, standing on a sidewalk at 1 a.m. with his wrists cuffed behind him, being guided toward a vehicle that was not going where he intended to go. She watched until the vehicle door closed. Then she looked at her hands in her lap. They were still, not the forced stillness of controlled fear, just still. Her own hands, doing nothing, requiring nothing, being exactly what they were without the constant background effort of management. Roman was watching her. She looked at him. "Okay?" he said. She thought about the word and what it meant and whether it applied. "Not yet," she said honestly, "but closer." He nodded once. She looked back at the street. The next 2 months were not a resolution. They were a reckoning, which was different, slower, less dramatic, more expensive, and more real. The federal case against Damien moved through its early phases with the deliberate grinding pace of legal machinery built for thoroughness rather than speed. Evelyn testified in formal session twice. The first time in the conference room she already knew. The second time in a deposition that lasted 6 hours and left her with the specific exhaustion of someone who has had every word they've ever said weighed and measured and tested for inconsistency. Dana Holt sat beside her for both and said exactly as much as needed saying and no more, which was one of the things Evelyn had come to understand was the defining quality of competent counsel and of certain kinds of people generally. The injunction was dismissed. The mental health motion was dismissed with the notation in the record that made Damien's legal team visibly uncomfortable in the room when it was read. Ellis Farrow recovered. He was a thin man in his late 50s with the haunted quality of someone who had spent years doing work he knew was wrong and had been waiting for a version of accountability that would allow him to stop. He and Evelyn sat in the same waiting room outside Carol's conference room on the second deposition day and did not speak to each other, but at one point he looked at her across the room with an expression she understood, the expression of 2 people who have both paid for the same thing in different currencies and know it. And she nodded at him once, and he nodded back. Her father's company did not survive. Sterling Capital's restructuring process concluded in the 7th week with an asset sale that cleared the immediate liabilities and left nothing behind except the name, which her father chose not to license or carry forward. She sat with him in the offices on the day the final paperwork was signed. A Tuesday, overcast, the kind of October day that made no concessions to the significance of what was happening in the rooms below it. And she watched him sign the last page and set the pen down. He sat for a long moment looking at the pen. Then he said, without looking up, "I should have believed you." She looked at his profile, at the age in it that had accelerated over the past 3 years in visible increments. "Yes," she said. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you say a true thing to someone you love, directly, without the softening that would have made it easier for both of them and also less honest. "You should have." He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the voice from the early morning phone call, stripped, without the managed layer. I know that's... He stopped. I know it's not sufficient. No, she said. It's not sufficient. She looked at her hands on the table. But it's a place to start. They sat together in the office for another 20 minutes, and neither of them tried to resolve anything further, because some things could not be resolved in a single conversation, and the attempt to resolve them prematurely produced a false closure that was worse than the open wound it covered. They both understood this, in the way that people who have lived with each other's damage for a long time eventually develop a literacy around what the damage requires. Before she left, her father reached out and held her hand for a moment, just held it, without speaking, with the specific grip of someone communicating through contact what the available language couldn't carry. She let him hold it. Her mother took longer. Her mother had, in the immediate aftermath, aligned with Damien's narrative, the breakdown story, the instability framing, and had spent 3 weeks in the specific purgatory of a woman who had made a public bet on the wrong outcome and was watching the outcome resolve in the wrong direction. When Damien's arrest became public and the federal case's scope became clear, and the 4 corporate allies who had been monitoring the situation issued their distancing statements, her mother had called Evelyn on a Wednesday morning and said almost nothing for 3 minutes and then said, I didn't know about the bruises. Evelyn had sat with the phone and the silence and the particular complexity of a love that had failed its most essential test and was still, despite that failure, love. I know you didn't know, she said finally, because I hid them from you. You shouldn't have had to... No, Evelyn said. I shouldn't have. But I also knew on some level that if I told you, you would have weighed it against the capital injection, and I wasn't sure which way you'd decide. A pause. And I couldn't survive being wrong about that. Her mother was quiet for a long time. You weren't wrong to be afraid of being wrong, her mother said. Her voice had an unfamiliar quality to it. Not the social register, not the event management tone, but something underneath both of those. Older, less polished, the voice of a woman who had spent decades building a version of herself designed to not need to make admissions like the one she was making now. That's the part I have to live with. It was the most honest thing her mother had said to her in years. It was not enough. It was also not nothing. The studio came together in the 5th week. She had photographed since she was 19. Not seriously, not professionally, but with the sustained commitment of someone who had found in the act of looking through a lens a version of attention that the rest of her life rarely permitted. The warehouse space in Brooklyn was available through a contact of Priya's, a 2-floor converted industrial building with north-facing skylights that produced the quality of light that photographers spent significant resources chasing, and that this building simply had, built into its architecture, available to anyone willing to deal with the freight elevator and the heating system that required specific handling in cold weather. She dealt with the freight elevator. She learned the heating system. Priya helped her paint the walls on the first weekend. The two of them in old clothes with rollers and a Bluetooth speaker. And for 6 hours on a Saturday, the entire weight of the previous 2 months was present in the room, but was not the most important thing in the room, which was the paint and the light and Priya's opinions about accent colors and the particular quality of ordinary work done alongside someone you trusted entirely. By the end of the weekend, the first room was white and clean and full of the north-facing light and smelled like new beginnings, which was a cliché that Evelyn permitted herself in the privacy of her own mind, because she had earned, she decided, at least a small number of clichés. The first clients came in the 6th week. Portraits, primarily. She had always been better with people than with objects. Better at the specific project of finding in a face the thing the face was not trying to show. She worked with a concentrated attention that her subjects consistently described as making them feel both seen and safe, which was not a combination she had set out to produce and which she recognized without sentimentality as something built from the particular experience of learning, over a long time, what the absence of both felt like. Roman came to the studio on the day she opened. He did not make a production of it. He arrived with coffee from the place 2 blocks down that she had identified in the first week as the best within walking distance. And he walked through the space with the quality of attention he gave to things that interested him, which was thorough and unhurried, and did not perform interest but simply had it. And he stood for a long time in front of the first photograph she had printed and mounted on the wall. It was not a portrait. It was a window. The specific window in the Tribeca apartment, the one she had stood at on the night everything began, looking at the city. She had gone back to photograph it 2 weeks after the arrest, on a morning when the light was right and the city outside it was doing the ordinary things cities do, and she had stood at the window and she had taken the photograph of what you could see through it. Not a dramatic view, not a skyline, just a cross-section of an ordinary city block, a delivery truck double parked, a tree in early October color, two people on the sidewalk who did not know they were being photographed. And what the photograph captured, and what she had been trying to capture, was the specific quality of the ordinary world as seen from the other side of something that had felt unsurvivable. Roman stood in front of it for a long time. "This is the one," he said. "The one what?" "The one that's going to last," he said. "The others are good. This one is true." She looked at him. She looked at the photograph. She had been thinking, in the weeks since the arrest, about the things Roman had said, and the things he had done, and the specific shape of what had happened between them over the course of a day that had begun with a wedding that didn't happen and ended with a federal arrest. She had been thinking about it carefully and without rushing toward conclusions, because she had learned enough about herself to know that she was capable of attaching significance to proximity and competence in truth-telling in ways that bore the marks of her specific history rather than clear assessment, and she had wanted to be sure as anyone can be about the interior logic of how one person comes to matter to another, that what she was thinking was her own. It was her own. She had been sure of it for about a week. She looked at him at the photograph and she said, "Stay for the opening." He turned from the photograph and looked at her. "I was planning to," he said. She nodded. She looked at the window photograph once more. She thought about the day it had been taken, the cold morning, the freight elevator, the specific quality of standing at a window that had once been the window you looked out of when you were trying to understand if you had enough courage to do the thing that needed doing, and finding that it was now just a window, just glass, just the ordinary membrane between inside and outside that all windows were, through which the ordinary world was continuously available. She had stood at that window on the morning she photographed it, and she had thought, "I'm 28 years old, and I have been through something that I would not have chosen and could not have avoided, and I am still here, and the window is still a window, and the city through it is still doing what cities do, and I'm going to be in this room for as long as I want to be and leave when I want to leave, and no one is going to tell me which of those things I'm allowed to do." That had been the thought. It was not a triumphant thought. It was quieter than triumph and more durable. The opening went until 10 in the evening. Priya was there. Her father was there. He arrived early and stayed late and said very little, but looked at each photograph with the specific attention of a man trying to understand something about his daughter that he had not previously had sufficient information to understand. At one point, standing in front of a portrait series she had taken of women who had agreed to be photographed in the specific act of looking directly into the camera, he turned to her and said quietly, "You've always done this." "Done what?" "Seen people," he said. "I didn't—" He stopped. "I should have looked more carefully." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, and then, because it was also true, "But you're looking now." By 10, the room had the quality of an evening that had run its full length and arrived at the natural moment of its ending. The specific warmth of people who have shared a space for a good reason beginning to move toward their coats and their goodbyes, the light in the room doing the thing that light does in the last hour of a gathering, softer and more particular. Priya hugged her at the door for a long time without saying anything, and Evelyn held on, and they stayed that way for long enough that it communicated everything that needed communicating without requiring the inadequate medium of words. Her father kissed her forehead at the door. He had not done that since she was small. She let him. When the last guest left, the studio was quiet in the particular way of spaces that have held people and then released them, warm, slightly rearranged, carrying the residue of presence. Evelyn stood in the center of it and looked at the photographs on the walls. She had made all of them in 6 weeks. She would make more. Roman was at the window, not the Tribeca window, a different window, the studio's rear window that looked out onto the building's back alley and the fire escapes of the buildings behind it, the ordinary urban geometry of the city's infrastructure. He was standing with a coffee that had gone cold, looking at nothing in particular, the posture of someone who was comfortable being somewhere without requiring the somewhere to perform for them. She crossed the room. She stood beside him. They looked out the window together at the alley and the fire escapes and the city's indifferent nighttime geometry. Pharaoh's testimony went into the official record today, he said. Carol called this afternoon. The case is solid. I know, she said. Holt told me. Damien's attorneys are pushing for a plea arrangement. I know that too. He looked at her. How do you feel about that? She thought about it genuinely. She thought about what a verdict after a full trial would mean versus what a documented plea arrangement would mean, and she thought about what she needed from the outcome. Not what would feel most satisfying, not what would look most like justice in the dramatic register, but what she actually needed in order to be finished with it and able to put it in its place. I need him to acknowledge it, she said. Not to me, not privately, on the record. Whatever arrangement they reach, it has to include a formal acknowledgement of the coercive conditions. She looked out the window. That's what I need. The rest is for the lawyers. Roman was quiet for a moment. Holt will make sure of it, he said. I know she will, Evelyn said. That's why she's my lawyer. He almost smiled. The almost smile that she had catalogued over the previous weeks and had come to understand as the full register of what that face produced in that direction, which was not a limitation, but simply his particular expression of something that in other people required more space. She looked out the window. I've been thinking about what you said, she said, in the hotel, that I wasn't a woman who needed rescuing. I remember. I've been thinking about whether it was true. She paused. I think it was mostly true. I think there was one door that you opened that I couldn't have opened from my side. The information, the context, the thing that made the decision survivable rather than suicidal. She turned and looked at him directly. But I've been trying to be honest about that, about the difference between the door you opened and the walk I took through it, because I think I need to know the difference, for myself. He held her gaze. That distinction matters, he said. You're right to make it. It matters because... She stopped, thought about how to say it accurately. Because for 2 years, someone told me what I was capable of and what I wasn't, and I have to be very careful now about which parts of what I've done I assign to myself and which parts I hand to someone else, even when the someone else deserves credit. She looked at him steadily. Especially then. He was quiet for a moment. Then let me tell you what I saw, he said. Not what I did, what I saw. He turned toward her slightly, the way he turned toward things he was going to say directly. I saw a woman who fainted from the accumulated weight of a situation that would have broken most people long before. I saw her wake up in a strange room and immediately begin assessing it. I saw her make a decision in under an hour that she had been unable to make for 2 years. And I saw her make it not because the conditions were suddenly easy, but because she had finally been told that the conditions were as bad as she knew they were, and that she was allowed to trust what she knew. He paused. I held a door. You walked through it, and then through 6 more after that, none of which I was anywhere near. That's the accurate accounting. She looked at him. She thought about accurate accounting. She thought about the bruise she had looked at in the mirror without covering it, and the microphone, and the sidewalk, and Carol's conference room, and 43 seconds in front of a camera, and the brownstone on the Upper West Side, and the warehouse with the north-facing light. She thought about all of it. She thought, yes, that's accurate. Okay, she said. She looked back out the window. Somewhere below them, several floors down and across the alley, a light came on in one of the buildings. A kitchen window, warm yellow, someone moving in the frame of it, a person at the end of their day beginning the ordinary domestic motion of whatever they did in their kitchen at 10:15 in the evening. Someone she would never know. Someone whose day had been entirely separate from hers, unconnected, running in parallel through the same city, the same October, the same indifferent and continuous present. She watched the light for a moment. She thought about all the lit windows she had ever sat in the dark beneath and looked up at, wondering about the people in them, the specific privacy of other lives lived in ordinary light behind ordinary glass. She thought about what it meant to be the person in the lit window rather than the person looking up at it. She thought about what it meant to stand in your own space, in light that was yours, at a window through which the city was simply the city, not a thing to escape into or be hidden by, but just the constant ambient fact of being alive in a place full of other people doing the same. She thought about 28 years old and the future belonging entirely to her. She thought about how that felt. It felt like a window, like ordinary glass, like the warm, specific, unspectacular weight of a life that had been through something terrible and had come out the other side into the ordinary, which was the thing she had been missing so long she had forgotten it was what she was looking for. She felt Roman beside her without looking at him. She felt the studio around her, the photographs on the walls, the north-facing light now dark with evening, the residue of the people who had been in it and were gone, the freight elevator, the heating system that required handling, the whole imperfect and functional and hers infrastructure of a space she had built from something other people had stopped using. She thought about all of it, and then she stopped thinking and just stood at the window and breathed. In, out. The city below doing what it always did. The light across the alley warm and ordinary and continuous. Roman beside her, not speaking, not moving, simply present in the way that certain people were present. Without demand, without performance, without requiring the moment to be larger than it was. She breathed. She let it be exactly as large as it was. Which was, she discovered, in the end, after everything. After the altar and the corridor and the car and the 42nd floor and the federal conference room and the brownstone and all of it, which was, she discovered, enough. It was finally and completely and without qualification enough.